Dear delegates, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today. It would have been a pleasure to see you all in person for this autumn meeting, but this was unfortunately not possible again this year. Hopefully, will our winter meeting in February next year be held in person in Vienna. It's an honor for me to chair this meeting after being elected as president for our assembly at the remote summer meeting. I am very humble for the trust shown me. I will work for principles of accountability, inclusion, respect for every country's territorium. I believe OSCE is a security organization, and it's unique. The broad security perspective of the OSCE, the three dimension, is a strength. As elected parliamentarians, do we have the huge responsibility to work for a secure region with respect for human rights, democracy, and all countries' right to their integrity. The climate meeting in Glasgow stressed the importance of the environmental challenges our region faces today. Multilateralism is the only way forward for a common pathway forward for a more secure world. As parliamentarians, do we have a unique possibility and responsibility for youth to use our parliamentary diplomacy a future based on the values in Helsinki Final Act and the Paris Charter. Shortly after being elected as president, did the Taliban capture Kabul and a complete takeover of Afghanistan plunged the country in a military, political, and humanitarian crisis. I took immediately action, hold meeting with the OSCE missions in the neighbor countries in Central Asia. I hold as well meeting with the head of the OSCE PA delegations in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. I invited also Turkmenistan's delegation, but I had a session in parliament at that time. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan are three OSCE countries with a border together with Afghanistan. What happens in Afghanistan has major implications for neighboring countries, but also to the entire OSCE region and globally in general. All OSCE three dimension is affected: the security and political, the economic, environmental, the human rights and democratic dimension. And therefore, I would also like to say that the security threats emanating from the instability are multiple. With the cold winter months in forward, we can expect that the humanitarian crisis will be even worse, leading to hunger, pushing many Afghanistans to flee their countries. Given the Taliban's history, there are very serious concerns that Afghanistan will once again become a safe haven for terrorist groups and a planning base for terrorist attacks worldwide. The economy in Afghanistan is already weak, and there is a huge risk it will become even weaker. Those who will suffer most from this is, of course, the ordinary people, but also institutions such as healthcare and education. The Taliban regime threatens the hard-won rights for women and girls. Even if the Taliban say they will respect women's and girls' rights, thus the report from inside Afghanistan shows the difference. It is essential that human security is protected by safeguarding the fundamental rights of all Afghans. All these are issues for which the OSCE has a solid accuracy. I have just returned from a visit together with Vice President and Special Representative on Central Asia, Ms. Bia Kauma, to Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. I went there to hear about their concerns and determine how OSCE PA can best offer its support. The common remarks was like, the future is impossible to predict. It haven't been possible to predict anything of the development so far. And most probably, it's not even possible to predict what will happen next. The second common remark was the need for international cooperation to raise awareness about the situation. Several interlocutors pointed out our activity and supports from us as parliamentarians is crucial. Also, our possibility for parliamentarian diplomacy, our possibility as members of a multilateral organization to talk, to discuss, to meet with interlocutors, because what's happening in Afghanistan is, as I mentioned, an issue that affects the whole world. And therefore, it's my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Tunja Urjula, Director of the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center and Deputy Head of the OSCE Secretariat in Tashkent, who we have the pleasure to join us later this afternoon. Our open debate will also offer you the opportunity to address developments in Afghanistan and address any other issues of relevance to the OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly. Let me already thank the chairperson of our general committees for their remarks, which will highlight key topics on the OSCE agenda in all three dimensions of security. This will further guide our Assembly in supporting the work of OSCE executive structures. Before we move on with our agenda, let me simply encourage you all to make the most of our discussions today by sharing our key message with other members of your parliament and with your governments. This will help to promote international cooperation on our common challenges and to give OSCE PA the work we do support, and also to get it the support it needs and deserves. And once again, thank you for joining the event today. I look forward this afternoon, and I hope you do the same. And once again, it's not a pleasure to meet on the screen, but it's better than meeting at all. And we will soon meet again, and I do really look forward to that. So by this, I leave number 1, and we'll go further on to the number 2 on the agenda. It's addresses by the chairpersons of the OSCE PA 3 general committees. And I will start to give the floor to Mr. Richard Hudson from USA, chairperson of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security. Mr. Richard Hudson, the floor is yours. Thank you. Mr. Richard Hudson, we can't hear you.
You should move to the second committee.
Let's move further on, and I will give the floor to Mr. Richard Hudson later. 2.2, Mr. Pere Joan Pons from Spain, chairperson of the General Committee on Economic Affairs and Science, Technology and Environment. The floor is yours. Welcome.
So, dear President, dear Secretary General, dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to join my first statutory meeting as chair of the General Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and Environment. Just let me start with one first idea. The crisis in Afghanistan is a mirror of the challenges the world faces today. Precisely today, the Afghan crisis in the cover of the French newspaper Le Monde a cover showing a country in crisis, with a regime with no respect for human rights, with recent killings, and the country on the verge of a severe humanitarian crisis, as the president already mentioned. So, and at the same time, we are having a key debate today in a week in which the world is in Glasgow with a major challenge, with a slogan, uniting the world to tackle climate change. So Afghanistan and climate change are of course tied and enchained. They can be dissociated. And I would like to say it bluntly. A colleague from Canada said this morning, with no climate security for all, there will be no global security for all either. And of course, there will be no security in Afghanistan either. So all OSCE members have a key role in the years to come to catalyze change, to work towards a double security, climate security and global security. Both are going hand in hand. As Afghanistan is concerned, well, it has been more than 2 months since the beginning of the Taliban regime. You mentioned it, the president. And on Tuesday, there was a killing in Kabul military hospital. Yesterday, all foreign currencies were banned in the country and winter is coming. So in the end, populations are at risk. The emergency is there. And I think the international community has been active on all fronts, from humanitarian aid to civil protection, supporting Afghan citizens and neighboring Central Asian countries. But 3 months later, many issues are already coming to light on the national and international levels. First, the humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been evacuated. Many refugees are being resettled. Families have been broken. People have lost everything. At the same time, the economic crisis, the sum of suspended foreign aid due to the Taliban takeover made up 40% of Afghanistan GDP. So such sharp reductions in international aid are causing a collapse in basic health and education services. And we don't have to forget that women are always suffering more this collapse. We cannot tolerate attacks against women and women's rights, of course. And of course, the sudden loss of public sector activity will have impacts on the economy, especially in the service and construction sectors, which account for 58% of GDP. And it is clear to me that declining grants combined with a lot of access to foreign exchange are also expected to result in a balance of payment crisis. Even before the fall of the government, Afghanistan was already facing daunting economic and development challenges. The slow economic growth reflected weak confidence amid a rapidly worsening security situation and severe drought conditions negatively affecting agriculture production. So, in fact, human-induced climate change has magnified the ongoing situation. The combined impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, conflict, and prolonged drought threatens millions of Afghans. I think this should be the key for all of us. Afghanistan is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world when it comes to climate change, based on its geography, sensitivity, and ability to cope with global warming. Water scarcity, drought, and flash floods are jeopardizing the agriculture of a country whose population's livelihood heavily depends on it. Most of Afghanistan is dry and hot for much of the year, and from 1950 to 2010, the country warmed 1.8 degrees Celsius, about twice the global average. Afghanistan itself ratified the Paris Agreement in 2017, and before the Taliban took over, the National Environment Protection Agency had planned to submit the updated climate pledge at the COP26 and ask for more financial assistance to improve water management, farm productivity, and reduce environmental harm. So Afghanistan has been actively engaging in fighting climate change to enhance equality, knowledge sharing, and partnership with countries around the world. It has improved the national climate targets under the Paris Agreement and developed the Climate Action Plan and the emissions inventory. But as you know, the Taliban regime shut down the National Environment Protection Agency, thereby jeopardizing all the efforts made so far. So again, this backdrop, resolute climate cooperation must remain high on our agenda, and incentive for transitioning to clean energy must be fostered. There is no alternative to backing each other up and supporting countries like Afghanistan in meeting its economic and environmental challenges. So this is what leaders from all over the world are underlining in Glasgow this week. And at this very moment, the COP26 is taking place in Glasgow, and nearly 200 governments are striving to advance climate commitments in line with the Paris Agreement. So we have to move forward because it's now or never. And actually this conference has been widely labeled as the world's last change to tackle climate change. So we have to accelerate as a global green transition. We have to do so all together, united, and we have to do it faster with global funding, as the African leaders have claimed in the last days. Don't forget that at the G20 last weekend, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi said that funding was not the problem. So let's move up. And if not, the consequences don't need to be detailed, but we all are affected by these consequences. So what we can do at those PA, all of CPA participating states have now ratified the Paris Agreement. We should lead this green transition and of course work together to implement the green agenda in line with the 2030 objectives. So we are all guardians of the Paris commitments on behalf of our citizens, and at national level, we have to catalyze change with national legislation at each of our countries. So we are one of the most powerful parliamentary assemblies. We are 323 members of parliament representing over 1 billion citizens. So it is our task to take advantage of this parliamentary assembly to catalyze urgent climate. So to end, I would like to underline again what is key for the years to come. There is no security for our citizens at local, regional, and international level without climate security. And if there is no global security, there is no climate security either. So let's think that it's now or never, and I'm going to end with 3 ideas. We are facing an unprecedented climate emergency, which is threatening our security, is threatening all of us. We as OSCE members have already placed the climate crisis at the core of our security agenda. I think this is key. And last but not least, we have to reinforce security and we have to settle the battle against climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Per-John Pons, for your intervention on these important topics for today's focus, the current security challenge focus on Afghanistan. And now I will try to give the floor to Mr. Richard Hudson, Chairperson of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security. Mr. Richard Hudson, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to see you. I look forward to joining you all in person next year. I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you in my capacity as chairman of the first committee of our assembly. As you can imagine, the events that have taken place in Afghanistan in recent months have been extremely personal for me. As many of you know, I have the honor of representing Fort Bragg, the home of the U.S. Army's 18th Airborne Corps, 82nd Airborne Division, and headquarters of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. The base also maintains an immediate response force of approximately 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers on alert, ready to deploy worldwide with minimal notice. In August, this force were the first Americans deployed to Kabul to assist with the evacuation efforts at the Hamid Karzai International Airport. The bottom line is forces from my district have been on the front lines in Afghanistan for the past 20 years. That said, I'm not here in my personal capacity or even speaking on behalf of the U.S. delegation to the Assembly. I understand a number of my colleagues from Congress will be providing their perspectives during the general debate, and I want to thank them for doing that. But as chairman of the first committee, it's my role to ensure our work addresses the principal challenges of the day and is designed to further to the maximum extent possible the interest of our shared constituents. In that context, I want to thank our president for organizing this very important session. It's right and proper that we gather together to discuss how developments in Afghanistan are likely to shape our region going forward and how we might best collectively address the challenges that are certain to emerge from what remains a deeply uncertain and unsettled situation. I especially look forward to hearing from our speaker from the OSCE, the Director of Conflict Prevention Center Director, Ambassador Tula Oriula. She is a regular contributor to the work of our assembly and has appeared before our committee on multiple occasions. And I want to thank you for being here, Ambassador, to help us reflect on the OSCE's possible added value in this context. As chairman, I also want to set out some questions that I think deserve attention today. Colleagues, make no mistake about it, whatever your views are on how or why developments have unfolded in Afghanistan in recent months, the way that they have, the current circumstances are certain to have a ripple effect on the security of OSCE participating states for many years to come. Perhaps most alarming is the return of an international terrorist threat from Afghanistan. First, let's remember who we're dealing with. The notion that those currently in charge in Kabul represent a new enlightened version of what we've seen before is clearly false. How do we know this? First, we know who these individuals are. A number of the senior members of the so-called Taliban government are on various anti-terrorism, international and national watch lists. Second, we also see what's happening on the ground, where conditions have largely returned to the previous era of Taliban reign. They feature brutality and oppression under the banner of their twisted and false interpretation of Islamic law. Even if we can somehow convince ourselves that the Taliban itself may not pose a direct threat to our countries, the real question of their capacity or will to counter groups active in Afghanistan who have a track record of seeking to attack our citizens. I'm especially concerned about ISIS-K, the group that perpetrated the heinous attack that killed 13 Americans and many, many more Afghans at the Kabul airport on August 26th. ISIS-K's success with high-profile and deadly attacks has gotten attention internationally and has reportedly inspired foreign fighters to travel to Afghanistan to join its ranks. The groups have stepped up recruiting over the internet, including by citing its successful Kabul airport strike. Neither should we forget one of the Taliban's most important sources of funding, the production and trade in illegal drugs. Afghanistan remains the world's biggest illicit supplier of narcotics, estimated to be responsible for more than 80% of the global opium and heroin. This has significant implications for OSCE participating states as major trafficking routes then disperse the drugs either through Central Asia into Russia or through the Balkans into Central and Western Europe. The ongoing economic and humanitarian crisis in the country might drive even more Afghans to engage in the narcotics market, which the Taliban has condemned as contrary to Islam, but consistently failed to control. Colleagues, the security situation in Afghanistan is intrinsically linked with that of the OSCE region as a whole, but it will first and most immediately affect Afghanistan's neighbors in Central Asia. We must all be particularly concerned about threats to the 3 OSCE participating states that have borders with Afghanistan, namely Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. This is perhaps the area in which our organization can have the greatest and most immediate impact. The OSCE already has several field missions active in Central Asia, such as the OSCE Border Management Staff College in Tajikistan. The areas in which the OSCE missions are active are among the highest needs in response to the crisis in Afghanistan. Border management, countering trafficking, countering violent extremism are just a couple examples. All are areas in which the OSCE could step up its assistance. Colleagues, I look forward to hearing your views on these questions and to work closely with those in the Assembly with related mandates, such as Special Representative on Central Asia, Pia Kama, and Reinhold Lopatka, the chairman of the Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, and I look forward to the debate. Thank you.
Chair Hudson, your intervention. I really appreciated your sharing of your knowledge and experience from your time in Afghanistan as well. Now I will give the floor to Ms. Serine Maboron from France, Chairperson of the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, Mrs. President, dear Margareta, dear colleagues. Il est naturel pour nous tous de considérer le changement de pouvoir en Afghanistan comme une menace pour la sécurité politico-militaire. Cependant, notre organisation est fondée sur une approche globale de la sécurité, y compris la sécurité humaine, qui considère que les défis liés à la dimension humaine sont une préoccupation légitime au-delà des frontières des États. Cela ne pourrait être plus pertinent pour notre discussion aujourd'hui sur l'Afghanistan. En Afghanistan, après une prise de pouvoir rapide par les talibans, les contraintes pour l'accès humanitaire sont extrêmement élevées. Les organisations humanitaires sont susceptibles de suspendre ou de retarder les opérations pour assurer la sécurité de leur personnel ou devoir négocier avec les talibans les autorisations d'accès. Bien que ces derniers aient fait des déclarations officielles sur l'activité de ces organisations, plusieurs facteurs sont susceptibles d'entraver leurs activités. Cela n'est pas acceptable, car le nombre de personnes ayant besoin d'une aide humanitaire a déjà considérablement augmenté au cours de ces 18 derniers mois, atteignant plus de 18 millions de personnes. Les développements récents s'ajoutent à un certain nombre de crises préexistantes, notamment la plus importante sécheresse depuis 30 ans, des inondations et la crise sanitaire de la Covid-19. Selon l'Organisation pour l'alimentation et l'agriculture, FAO, et le Programme alimentaire mondial, plus d'un Afghan sur deux sera confronté à des niveaux d'insécurité alimentaire aigus ou d'urgence, et dès ce mois de novembre, nécessitant des interventions urgentes pour prévenir une catastrophe humanitaire. Le premier droit est le droit à se nourrir. La population commence déjà à mourir de faim et n'aura comme alternative que se laisser faire ou migrer. Le pays est fragmenté avec une administration instable et des fonctionnaires craignant des représailles. Pour certains, les talibans sont susceptibles de manquer de capacités techniques pour fournir avec succès les services de base. Par ailleurs, leur capacité à gouverner dépendra de la collaboration avec les fonctionnaires en place. Et si l'on ajoute à cela l'absence de vision politique pour le pays, l'émergence de multiples autres milices, la situation est critique. Il est nécessaire de s'engager à assurer la sécurité et la sûreté de tous en Afghanistan. La santé, l'alimentation, la protection sont bien sûr des principales clés du soutien à la population. Cependant, il est nécessaire d'aller au-delà et d'assurer le respect des droits humains en Afghanistan, la protection humanitaire des civils dans le contexte de la prise de contrôle militaire par les talibans. Human Rights Watch a rapporté que l'engagement des talibans à respecter les droits humains et que des violations graves ont été établies. Des rapports provenant de 16 provinces récemment envahies par les talibans indiquent que les femmes subiraient aujourd'hui des violations des droits de l'homme similaires à celles d'il y a 20 ans sous le précédent régime taliban. Des mariages forcés, de sévères restrictions à la liberté de mouvement. La population ethnique Hazara serait également exposée à un risque de persécution particulière. Le 7 octobre, face à la montée de la violence et des violations des droits de l'homme en Afghanistan, notamment des exécutions sommaires, extrajudiciaires, des détentions arbitraires, des violences à l'encontre des manifestants pacifiques ou encore des discriminations à l'égard des femmes et des filles. Le Conseil des droits de l'homme de l'ONU a décidé de nommer un rapporteur spécial chargé de suivre la situation des droits de l'homme dans ce pays. Je salue cette initiative et j'encourage l'ensemble des pays de notre zone à la soutenir. La situation humaine en Afghanistan est un signal d'alarme. L'APOSCE a déjà souligné la nécessité d'une coopération entre les États voisins de l'Afghanistan. Il faut également soutenir ses voisins pour les aider, car il s'agit de toute la stabilité de la région. Ces violations des droits de l'homme en cours, la vague migratoire en provenance d'Afghanistan sont des problèmes sur lesquels les pays de l'OSCE doivent travailler et les résoudre dans la paix et avec humanité. C'est notre intérêt. C'est l'intérêt de l'OSCE et surtout l'intérêt du peuple afghan qui vit dans ces conditions abominables. Enfin, Je tenais à vous faire part de ma stupeur quant à la campagne de communication de l'APCE. Comment peut-on promouvoir la liberté en faisant la promotion du voile comme une liberté? Je termine par un simple rappel à nous tous. Les problèmes humanitaires et de droits de l'homme dans un pays ne restent jamais confinés à ce seul pays. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Ms. Erin Mobon, for your intervention. And now we will leave number 2 on the draft agenda and go further on to number 3, keynote address by Ambassador Tuula Yrjölä, Director of the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center and Deputy Head of the OSCE Secretariat in Tashkent. Ms. Tuula Yrjölä, the floor is yours and we are all eager to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I do hope you can hear me. I would just like to correct slightly. I am in Vienna, not in Tashkent, but otherwise quite well in terms of the title indeed. Thank you. So, Madam President and distinguished delegates and colleagues, I mean, thank you so much for the invitation to join you today for what is really a very timely discussion. And also, I was very interested to hear the addresses, the previous addresses. Now, I have to start with saying that, of course, and you know this, but Afghanistan is not an OSCE participating state, but it has been a partner for cooperation for many years. And what happens there is indeed of great consequence for not only participating states in the region, but also beyond, as in fact today's conference proves. So although our ability as an organization to intervene there directly is very limited, we do have a strong and clear interest in development in the country itself. Aside from internal governance related questions and potential direct security threats, we have to keep in mind, and this has already been pointed out by the previous speakers, really the socio-economic catastrophe looming over Afghanistan, the potential economic meltdown, and this seems to be the direction unless the international community finds ways to help under the prevailing political conditions. This will have catastrophic impact for Afghans, not least from the humanitarian perspective. But we expect it to also have direct as well as indirect consequences for Afghanistan's neighbors, both immediately and in the longer term. And I had the opportunity to visit Tajikistan at the end of September to have discussions there to understand how we can support the country with the longest border with Afghanistan, and therefore the most vulnerable to the potential effects of the evolving situation there. And we're acutely aware, of course, that several of our participating states are also linked to, in fact, in some cases, very substantial ethnic groups inside Afghanistan, and are understandably concerned about their situation and future. And despite promises to the contrary by the Taliban, we've witnessed negative impacts on human rights across the board, not least on women and young people who remain really key stakeholders on whom so much of the country's development will depend in the long run. So our consideration and responses in policies and programs should focus on better outcomes for women and youth. And with COP26 having started this week in Glasgow, we indeed should not forget that Afghanistan is also highly impacted by climate change. So there are really many pieces of the Afghanistan puzzle that are relevant for the OSCE and for our participating states. And therefore, we, the OSCE, needs to consider and to respond to the developments of recent months, in particular by supporting participating states in mitigating the impacts of the evolving situation. Now, of course, we're not a humanitarian organization, nor are we a provider of hard security. And there are other international actors, not least the UN, who are already closely engaged and whose role remains and will remain essential. But the OSCE must also be part of the response. And as always, we need to focus on the areas where we have value added and where we have capacity, and to build on these. And one of our strengths is that we're quite nimble in responding relatively quickly and flexibly. But at the same time, the value that we bring is generally in longer term capacity building rather than as first responders. And many of you will be well aware of the excellent and long-standing work of the organization on border management in particular. And that includes through the Border Management Staff College in Dushanbe, as well as through other projects in this area in Tajikistan and the other Central Asian states. And I was very glad to note in particular the address of the chairperson of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security, Mr. Hudson, the already strong knowledge of the important work of our field operations in the region. We have a strong and already existing role in countering organized crime and a range of illicit flows, be it in trafficking of human beings or small arms and light weapons or cultural property. And all of these are highly relevant for the current Afghan context. And we will continue and we will build further on our work on countering and preventing violent extremism leading to radicalization and terrorism. And as always, we look to ensure that these challenges are dealt with within the framework of the rule of law and the protection and advancement of human rights. After all, one of our advantages lies in the comprehensiveness of our concept of security. And we're also ready to support participating states in building their resilience to future shocks and stresses. And from this lens, we can look into wider issues across the broad OSCE agenda, such as economic connectivity, strengthening of governance and tackling corruption, energy security, or helping sustainably to combat and prevent organized crime, corruption and drug use, and targeting, in particular, young people who may also be worst affected by the economic difficulties. And these issues are directly relevant for participating states in the immediate neighborhood of Afghanistan. And many of them have a potential wider impact across the OSCE area, including in the context of potentially wider migration flows, or for example, in relation to organized crime and trafficking of weapons, drugs, and cultural property. So we need to think widely and we need to think holistically across the OSCE area and beyond, and across the entirety of the OSCE's agenda. Cross-border flows and regional approaches are as important as working directly with individual participating states on the specific challenges that they face. And for the OSCE to be smart and responsive to the complex challenges that are emanating from Afghanistan, we're going to need to think outside of our traditional geographic or technical mandates. We'll need to model internally the type of cooperation, learning, and problem solving that all stakeholders will need to adopt in order to remain fit for purpose in this fast-changing environment. So in order to do this, we've been consulting closely internally across departments and structures here in Vienna and more widely with the OSCE field operations, the institutions, and colleagues in the Parliamentary Assembly Secretariat. And we're trying to think on our feet, to think more flexibly than perhaps we're used to under normal circumstances. In fact, just last week, or rather, this week, we are in the middle of a series of workshops that are intended to help us develop a broader strategic framework for an OSCE response. Colleagues from the PA Secretariat are involved in this as well, which I'm glad about. And the aim is to have something ready to present at the Stockholm Ministerial Council. But let's be realistic. In order to do more, to do something new, all of this will require additional resources to turn into something more concrete. And we're looking to launch a repository program as a framework for funding extra budgetary projects. The sums will not be huge by international standards. I mean, we're not competing with the crisis appeal for UN agencies, but we will be looking to your authorities to support us. And in all of this, we of course remain in close contact with our partner organizations. The exchanges between organizations on Afghanistan have actually significantly increased, which is really good. For example, as part of our annual regional heads of field operations meeting in Central Asia on July 9th, so already then, I chaired a special session with colleagues from the UN, the EU, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization about how to address the potential fallout from instability in Afghanistan. And much of this instability was and questions were already reflected in a special Asian Partners Contact Group meeting on the then sharply deteriorating security situation in Afghanistan that was convened by the 2021 APCG Chair Albania on the 23rd of July. Among others, Secretary General Schmidt of the OSCE, the then Afghan Deputy Minister for Political Affairs NAB, a UN Deputy Special Representative and Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Afghanistan Awad, and former UNHCR Deputy Representative in Afghanistan Patel raised attention to what were already then worrying developments in the country. And well, sadly, uncertainties that are current really mean that much of our engagement with Afghanistan is with, let's say, Afghanistan itself is paused right now. The relationship had really developed well in the 18 years since Afghanistan became a partner for cooperation. And you may recall that it was reinforced in Ministerial Council decisions in Madrid and Vilnius, as well as in last year's declaration on cooperation with the Asian Partners for Cooperation. Next year, Sweden will be chairing the Asian Partners Contact Group, but the changes on the ground mean that there is a need to reevaluate it and potentially to prepare a new document to reflect the new situation, and this won't be simple. Afghanistan's status as an OSCE partner is based on shared values, the commitment to which is obviously currently in question. The Taliban regime in Kabul is not recognized and its democratic legitimacy is questionable. And the OSCE, along with other organizations, will be closely observing the developing situation, and we will see to what extent engaging Afghan representatives and individuals in OSCE events and activities can be feasible. And of course, for us, I mean, future engagement with Afghanistan will be guided in particular by the approach taken by the UN. And in all of this, we are, of course, guided by the interests and needs of our participating states, whether those hosting OSCE field operations or others. Wider discussion, consultation, and coordination will remain vital. And well, in this context, discussions such as today's conference are very, very helpful. And we very much appreciate the role that the Parliamentary Assembly can play and does play in raising awareness, in providing political weight and support to the OSCE, as well as supporting dialogue and complementary activity. So I look forward to continuing to listen to today's discussions and to really continuing our good collaboration in the longer term. And I do look forward to reporting back to your winter meeting next February, and I hope that that can be in person. So thank you for my part.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador Tula Örle. It was a pleasure to listen to you. And I particularly remember 3 words you mentioned: to have a holistic and widely perspective and be flexible. And it's very, I'm very pleased that you also will stay and listen to the debate, and look forward to meet you in Vienna. And now I will open this afternoon's debate. It's number 4. We now, as explained earlier, members wishes to speak were asked to sign in advance. The list is now closed. We have 32 registered speakers, and we need to conclude by 5 o'clock, no later. Therefore, I would kindly ask members to limit their interventions to 3 minutes. I will give the floor first to Vice President and Special Representative on Central Asia, Ms. Pia Kauma from Finland. The floor is yours, but after that, I will give the floor to Senator Ben Cardin from USA. Ms. Pia Kauma, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Madam Chair, dear colleagues, in the capacity of Vice President of our Assembly, as well as Special Representative on Central Asia, I had the opportunity to visit Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, which are neighboring countries to Afghanistan. Together with President Sederfeld and a small team from the Secretariat, we spent 5 days first in Tashkent and thereafter another 5 days in Dushanbe. In this context, I would like to thank Mr. Sadiq Safoyev, the head of delegation of Uzbekistan, as well as Mr. Fatto Soda, the head of delegation of Tajikistan, for very interesting and fruitful conversations and meetings that we had during our visit. It really was a pleasure for me to meet you in person in your own home countries. The main purpose of our visit was, of course, to listen and to learn more about the issues which are important to you in this region, and to discuss together how the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly can support you. But thirdly, we're keen to hear about perspectives on the implications of recent developments in Afghanistan for the neighboring countries and regional security in Central Asia more generally, and what role Uzbekistan and Tajikistan can play in addressing these challenges. As we all know, the situation in Afghanistan will have large implications not only to Central Asia, but to the countries in our Assembly as a whole. Dear Madam Chair, dear colleagues, the issue of Afghanistan can be discussed, as we are used to here in our Assembly, in 3 different categories or baskets: hard security, economic, and humanitarian aspects. I would like to start with the humanitarian aspect, namely that related to refugees. With winter coming up, I'm worried about the growing number of Afghans seeking refuge outside of the country. In recent months, there has been a further striking decline in the security and human rights situation in large parts of the country. And it is estimated that since the beginning of 2021, over 558,000 Afghans have been internally displaced by the armed conflict within the country. World Food Programme, in turn, has estimated that even 95% of Afghans are struggling to feed themselves already today. With these figures in mind, I was very pleased to learn that Uzbekistan is in fact already making an important contribution by allowing the border city of Termets to function as United Nations logistics hub for the provision of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, and that Tajikistan in turn already now generously provides refugees access to basic social services and work opportunities. This is very important to facilitate their integration. Dear Madam Chair, when talking about refugees, we must also bear in mind, as you know, that not all crossing the border have only good intentions. Radicalization and terrorism are real threats in these conditions where there is lack of food, lack of fuel, and all daily necessities, and where especially young men without employment are good targets for terrorist recruiters. The large amount of arms and weapons left in the country and in the wrong hands are a real threat, not only to Afghans, but to the regional and international community as a whole. Dear Madam Chair, dear colleagues, establishing stability in Afghanistan will be a long mission. It doesn't happen overnight. I find it very important that our Assembly stands united to help in every possible way we can, especially in good operation with the neighboring countries that are also participating states in our Assembly. Thank you.
Very much, Vice President Pia Kauma. And next speaker is Ben Cardin, Senator Ben Cardin from USA. He will be followed by Dr. Heidi Frey from Canada. Senator Ben Cardin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
President Cedarfeld, first of all, thank you for arranging this debate and discussion on Afghanistan. The United States was in Afghanistan for 20 years, trying to bolster the elected Afghan government. The withdrawal of our troops was a long time coming and something the American people wanted to see happen. The speed which the Afghan army collapsed or deserted after 2 decades and billions of dollars of training, along with first-rate equipment, was astonishing and a deep disappointment. The Afghan government and the democratic institutions we worked hard to support have not taken root. One of the prime reasons was corruption, a problem long recognized by the United States. The congressionally mandated Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction had repeatedly reported that corruption was undermining operations in Afghanistan and the government was ruling through patronage. True democratic governance failed to emerge in Afghanistan, and average Afghans felt trapped between the Taliban that had long preyed upon them and a government who did the same. We must begin to view corruption as a national security threat that deserves priority. Tragically, it appears that the gains made through the years, particularly regarding the rights of women and children, may be lost. We are now receiving reports that the targeting and even assassination of women for their work defending and promoting democracy, equality, and higher education and human rights. There's also a looming humanitarian crisis and food insecurity. Even before the Taliban takeover, the number of Afghans in need of humanitarian assistance had nearly doubled since last year, encompassing about half the population. We should expand our policies to allow Afghans at high risk to seek refuge in our countries and offer humanitarian assistance to those who remain in Afghanistan. I've asked President Biden to dramatically increase the United States refugee quota for Afghanistan and to direct the United States government to expedite processing of special immigrant visas and priority 2 refugee designation applications, as well as to expand eligibility and assistance under the P2 program to include women, the LGBTQ+ community, and ethnic and religious minorities. We also need to ensure that humanitarian assistance can reach those in most need. The Taliban has been specifically designated global terrorist groups in 2002. The legal restrictions that accompany this designation could impede the delivery of humanitarian aid. We need to enable non-governmental organizations to deliver desperately needed assistance in Afghanistan by making it possible for funds to be transferred into Afghanistan for the activities of NGOs, either by using protection and guidance from financial institutions or creating a safe panel channel. And in conclusion, let me just make an observation that Afghanistan is a partner country since 2003. Before we recognize any representative of Afghanistan to participate in our assembly, we should make sure that they will adhere to the principles of the Helsinki Final Act. With that, Madam Chair, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Senator Ben Cardin. Next speaker is Dr. Heidi Frey from Canada. She will be followed by Joe, member of the Congress in USA, Joe Wilson. Dr. Heidi Frey, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So good to see you, albeit virtually. I just wanted to say that I'm so pleased that the OSCE is doing this particular intervention and debate. I want to speak with both hats, a special representative for women and the Canadian delegation. Canada ended its military role in Afghanistan in 2014, but we have remained engaged in humanitarian, financial, and diplomatic ways to help. But what I want to talk about is the threat to women, girls, journalists, MPs, human rights defenders, minority, ethnic, and religious groups, and the LGBTQ2+ groups. 2 months ago, women held 30% of the seats in the parliament in Afghanistan. Today, most of them have fled. But those who have stayed, and I want you to remember these names, Madam President, Salina Mazari, Zarifa Ghaffari, and Fauzia Kufi, whose lives, they are parliamentarians and governors and deputy speakers, but they have remained and they are fighting. And they are fighting, but their lives are being threatened every day. In fact, Fauzia Kufi has been shot in the arm as a deputy speaker, and the others are in Afghanistan. They are staying to fight. Now, we know that in Afghanistan, women and girls can go out, they can do shopping, they just cannot work, and the girls cannot go to school. And so what I want to do is to say that it is time for us to actually talk about action. I know we as an OSCE writ large cannot do very much. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources, but we represent each one of our parliaments, and each one of our parliaments have the ability to do something. I think the first thing that we want to talk about is to look at, in fact, helping with humanitarian aid, second, which is food and all of the things that everybody else talked about. But I think we also want to talk about what we can actually do to help the refugees. In Canada, we have committed to 40,000 Afghan refugees. They are the people who helped us with translations when we were in the military in Afghanistan, but they are also women and girls and journalists and those people who are at risk. And I think we have to commit, go back and get our parliaments to commit to doing something. Talk is great. We all know, we all agree. I listen to all the speakers. Everybody's saying the same things, but now let's put it into action, because the security of the region depends on it. And so do the rights of women and girls and all of the parliamentarians who are our colleagues in this part of the world. And I think it's very important for us to go back, speak in our parliaments, urge our governments to do something about it. And as I say, Canada is hoping to set an example with the 40,000 refugees that we intend to bring. Thank you for listening, colleagues, and good morning. It's morning here, by the way.
Good morning, Special Representative. I can't say that it's morning because you look so engaged and always very stimulating to listen to you. Thank you, Dr. Fry. And now I will give the floor to Joe Wilson from USA. He will be followed by Deputy Head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Yasabarov. And once again, as I always say, I apologize for my very bad pronunciation of names. But now I will give the floor to Mr. Joe Wilson. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President and colleagues, and Madam President, you do very well. And thank you for addressing the tragedy of Afghanistan. I agree with Senator Ben Cardin. It's bipartisan, Democrats and Republican. I agree with our Canadian colleague that we just heard, and I agree with Congressman Richard Hudson. I'm very concerned about a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan to host and foster terrorism. It is vital we ensure that Afghanistan does not become again a safe haven for Al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorists to commit mass murder worldwide, as we have seen with 9/11 in Afghanistan earlier. Sadly, the composition of the proposed Taliban terrorist government associated with Al-Qaeda directly continue their intent to return to harboring terrorist groups and to total subjugation of women. I tragically believe that President Biden's decision was wrong. We should not have withdrawn US troops from Afghanistan before the Taliban lived up to any commitments. Now we need to work together to use all possibilities available to prevent the Taliban from promoting terrorism and from trampling on human rights of Afghan citizens, including women and ethnic and religious minorities. With the release of terrorists from Bagram base, all countries are at risk, as has happened in New Zealand, Norway, the United Kingdom, in Afghanistan itself with multiple attacks on mosques, and in Uganda. The global war on terrorism sadly continues. Few countries have embassies on the ground in Afghanistan. This undermines the ability to collect information and that would help us to prevent terrorist attacks. Moreover, the Taliban themselves have undertaken to support terrorist operations. We must work together to prevent this. I note that the EU is considering reopening an office in Kabul later this month. We can leverage Afghans' influence by freezing financial assets that the Taliban have not had access to so far. Political recognition can also be used. We should not recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government, nor should we recognize any ambassadors that the Taliban might appoint to OSCE or elsewhere. We need to reconsider Afghanistan's status as an OSCE partner for cooperation as the Taliban continues. With this, I believe the Taliban have already continued their oppressive treatment of women. Burqas are back. Women have been told to stay home from work. Girls' ability to go to school has been restricted. After 20 years of improving women's rights, this is tragic. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. It's an honor, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joe Wilson. Next speaker is the Deputy Head of the Russian Federation delegation, Vladimir Chabarov. He will be followed by the head of the Polish delegation, Ms. Barbara
Ситуация
Bartos.
в Афганистане стала важным пунктом региональной и международной повестки дня. Резкое изменение военно-политической обстановки в этой стране и переход движения талибов к власти в Кабуле теперь это объективная реальность, с которой международному сообществу так или иначе приходится иметь дело. Состоявшееся 19-20 октября в Москве заседание расширенной тройки московского формата консультаций по Афганистану с участием высокопоставленной делегации новых афганских властей подтвердили высокую эффективность и востребованность этих механизмов в деле урегулирования ситуации в Афганистане. Отмечаем также, что в ходе упомянутых заседаний делегация Афганистана демонстрировала восприимчивость к тезисам о необходимости формирования подлинно инклюзивного правительства с участием всех этнополитических сил и соблюдения базовых прав человека. Была подтверждена линия новых афганских властей на борьбу с терроризмом и наркоугрозами. Впрочем, Россия по-прежнему не торопится с официальным признанием режима талибов. Будем и далее следить, чтобы обещания движения талибов подкреплялись делами, в первую очередь в борьбе с терроризмом и наркотиками. Исходим из того, что в настоящее время на первый план выходят вопросы гуманитарного содействия Афганистану и постконфликтного восстановления страны с учетом непростой социально-экономической ситуации и рисков усугубления миграционной обстановки в регионе. Считаем, что основную долю соответствующих расходов должны взять на себя Соединенные Штаты Америки и их союзники, которые несут ответственность за оставленное в Афганистане наследство после своего 20-летнего присутствия в этой стране. Считаем неприемлемым перемещение военной инфраструктуры США и НАТО, а также сотрудничающих с ним афганцев из Афганистана на территорию соседних стран, в первую очередь в Центральную Азию. Кроме того, наша озабоченность вызывает угроза потока беженцев с территории Афганистана в сопредельные страны. На наш взгляд, это сопряжено с высокими рисками для безопасности этих государств и может привести к дестабилизации всего региона. Беспокойство у нас вызывает и возможность проникновения террористических и экстремистских элементов на территорию стран-соседей Афганистана под прикрытием гуманитарных лозунгов и призывов о помощи беженцам или сотрудничавших с западниками афганцев. По-прежнему крайне остро стоит проблема производства и контрабанды наркотиков. Афганистан остается крупнейшим поставщиком опиатов в мире, до 90% объема мирового рынка. Более 2/3 провинций Афганистана являются наркопроизводящими. Усилий прежнего правительства явно не хватало для противодействия незаконному обороту наркотиков. Посмотрим теперь, как это будет получаться в движении талибов. Положительный опыт у них имеется. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. Vladimir Jashabarov. Next speaker is Barbara Bartos from Poland. She will be followed by Nicholas Samkaradas from Georgia. Ms. Barbara Bartos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, dear colleagues. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to join this important debate, which is held online, but nevertheless, we are touching on very important topics. We are also monitoring developments as they unfold in Afghanistan, lack of stabilities, threats to lives to Afghani people, create conditions for mass migrations. Considering the fact that lack of food security is one of the key reasons behind migration, Poland has decided to voluntarily pay more than 1 million Polish zlotys to the Global Food Programme in Afghanistan and Tajikistan. In addition, Poland will donate 2 million zlotys altogether to humanitarian relief programs in Afghanistan, rolled out by specialist UN agencies. Just like many other countries, Afghanistan has been benefiting from Polish humanitarian aids for years. Our humanitarian commitment to Afghanistan dates back to 2002, when we were making voluntary payments to organizations operating in this country. From 2002 until 2020, we have made a contribution valued at 45.33 million USD altogether, including Law and Order Trust Fund for Afghanistan, the UN Democracy Fund, Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, the International Red Cross Committee, the UN Global Food Programme, and the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. I would like to assure you that Poland is helping everyone who's fleeing wars and persecution. Recently, we have evacuated more than 1,300 Afghani nationals from Kabul. We are an open country driven by democratic principles, fulfilling its international commitments and underpinned by Christian values. I would like to stress and highlight unprecedented hybrid attack on the Polish-Belarusian border, which strives to destabilize UN external border and the Schengen area. It bears traces of human trafficking and should be as such monitored by our assembly. But we should take into consideration the well-being of each and every human being, which is why Poland has offered to Belarus cooperation. We have sent the first convoy in August, which was turned back later. On the 5th of October, we have submitted a diplomatic note with no response. And on the 23rd of October, the Polish President Andrzej Duda organized another convoy with tents and blankets, which was turned down by Belarus as well. In early 2022, Poland will take over the chairmanship of OSCE. We will be focusing on local conflicts, and we plan to actively contribute to all 4 dimensions of OSCE. Stable security, both in military and economic dimension, human rights, and the rule of law. We will also focus on the reconstruction of our economies after the pandemic, because the recovery requires streamlined activities to ensure integration and strong growth. We need strong economies to provide humanitarian relief whenever it's needed, just like in Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Barbara Bartos, head of the Polish delegation. Now, next speaker is head of the Georgian delegation, Nicholas Samkaradze. He will be followed by Ruben Gallegos from USA. And by this, I will give the floor to Nicholas Samkaradze. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Good evening, dear colleagues, and to some of you, good morning. And thank you for organizing this debate on a very important topic on the international agenda, the security situation in and around Afghanistan. Georgia has been part of the peace and stabilization operations under NATO mission for 18 years, and serving shoulder to shoulder with American and German soldiers in providing security and stability both in Kabul and northern Afghanistan. I may remind you that Georgia was the biggest non-NATO contributor to the Afghanistan mission, and unfortunately we lost more than 32 soldiers during those missions. Georgia has been also very active in evacuating people from Afghanistan. More than 50 flights have been carried out from Kabul to Georgia and to other European countries, then evacuating more than 2,300 people of different nationalities from Afghanistan, mainly people, citizens of Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, also Netherlands, and other European countries. Furthermore, Georgia has provided safe haven to some of the staff of international organizations, Afghan citizens who are now residing in Georgia. So we are trying to ease the pain of all citizens with our humble contribution to Afghan tragedy. Unfortunately, with the withdrawal of NATO from Afghanistan, the problems are now are getting more and more pressing. The security situation is what worries us most. Although our Central Asian friends and colleagues have to face it directly, but the South Caucasus region is also somehow affected with this developments in Afghanistan. And I hope very much that we could come together to find solutions to these security challenges that the current situation in Afghanistan is now posing to the whole OSCE area. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to joint actions in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas Samkaradze. Next speaker is Mr. Ruben Gallegos from USA. He will be followed by head of the Ukrainian delegation, Mr. Mikita Potorayev. Mr. Ruben Gallegos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
You didn't flip the camera around. 1 second, please. How do you flip the camera around? Yeah. Click on the arrow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, and I apologize for that. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with all of you today to share my perspective of the events in Afghanistan this year and how we move forward. As a combat veteran of the Iraq War, I was heartbroken by the events we witnessed during this withdrawal this past August. The resurgence of the Taliban is a tragedy for the Afghan people, and was incredibly difficult to watch for the many American service members and those of our allies who served and who lost friends during the mission in Afghanistan. But I also believe the events surrounding the withdrawal underline the reality that after 20 years, 4 presidents, and significant resources, the conditions for peaceful and stable Afghanistan could not be created. While the Afghanistan evacuation effort was an impressive logistical feat, made possible by many of America's partners represented here, we know there's more to be done to protect Afghans who worked for us for all those years and those at high risk from the Taliban. Many of your countries have not only assisted with the evacuation, but also accepted Afghan refugees or are hosting vulnerable Afghans temporarily while they undergo processing. For this, I say thank you. But bringing Afghan refugees to America or other countries for safe harbor is only the first step. Just as the international community has pulled together to help those fleeing Afghanistan, we must also ensure that those who have been evacuated have long-term support in the resettlement process. The United States must do its part in accepting the bulk of Afghan refugees, and I have personally pushed in Congress to provide Afghans with long-term resources they need to settle in a new life here in the United States. That also includes an effort I'm leading to ensure that experts, stakeholders, Afghans themselves, and the veterans who help advocate for their evacuation have a seat at the table to shape resettlement policy. It is not easy to start a new life in a new country. I ask all of the representatives here today to join me in my commitment to ensuring that Afghans bravely starting new lives across the world can count on the enduring support of the nations and communities that have welcomed them. Yet, even as we commit to aiding the Afghans who left their homes, I know many of the countries represented today are focused on supporting those at risk who remained in Afghanistan. I know you will have a partner in the United States on that mission going forward. To help achieve this mission, we must find ways to support Afghans in country who are bravely calling for progress, and we must stand up for the human rights of those who suffer at the hands of the Taliban. The end of America's military commitment in Afghanistan does not mean we will turn a blind eye to Afghanistan's people or the security of the region, especially when it comes to preventing the growth of terrorist organizations. I would urge all OSCE countries here to join us in that vigilance. In fact, I'm hopeful that today's forum and discussion we're having today will help cement an understanding of the shared priorities we have for Afghans and the Afghanistan moving forward. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you all today, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruben Gallegos. Next speaker is Mr. Mikita Potorayev, head of the Ukraine delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Denis Karas from Belarus. Mr. Mikita Potorayev, the floor is yours. Thank you. We can't hear you.
Not there.
Disconnected.
I will take the next speaker and try again to give Mr. Mikita the floor again. Next speaker is Denise Karas from Belarus, followed by Kyriakos Hariani from Cyprus. Mr. Denise Karas, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Уважаемые коллеги, хотел бы обратить внимание на проблему возрастающих потоков нелегальной миграции в ЕС. Мы убеждены, причина этого кризиса в разрушении национальных культур, мироустройства, миропорядка в Ливии, Сирии, Ираке, Афганистане, которые были реализованы странами коллективного Запада и которые несут за это ответственность. Это следствие их необдуманных, близоруких и, можно сказать, преступных действий. Сегодня Беларусь испытывает колоссальное давление, поскольку международные преступные группировки начали использовать новый маршрут проникновения в ЕС через Беларусь. Уже сегодня власти Беларуси несут серьезные издержки, пытаясь ограничить въезд в Республике Беларусь лиц, которые вызывают подозрения в том, что они могут стать нелегальными мигрантами. И это весьма трудоемкая работа. Она отнимает огромное количество человеческих ресурсов. Но мы не можем и не будем запрещать въезд в Республике Беларусь для всех граждан этих стран. Это нарушение прав свободы на передвижение. Все это произошло исключительно потому, что ЕС в одностороннем порядке поломал систему взаимодействия по защите от нелегальной миграции. Но более всего удивляет то, что страны ЕС не хотят признавать своих ошибок и пытаются переложить ответственность за происходящее на Беларусь. При этом мы видим, что власти Польши и Литвы прибегают к самым бесчеловечным методам решения миграционной проблемы, принимают законы, противоречащие демократическим принципам, используют негуманную практику, когда мигрантов избивают и силой выталкивают на территорию Беларуси. Имеется случай гибели людей. Это факт, и все об этом знают. Необходимо подчеркнуть, что действия властей Литвы и Польши осуждают соответствующие органы ЕС и международные организации. Мы знаем о письме комиссара Совета Европы по правам человека Дуни Миятович в адрес польского и литовского премьер-министров с требованием прекратить произвол в отношении мигрантов. Обеспокоенность в связи с действием властей Польши и Литвы уже высказало руководство Международной организации по миграции и Управления Верховного Совета комиссара ООН по делам беженцев. Есть даже вердикт Европейского суда по правам человека, который требует перестать издеваться над мигрантами и обеспечить для них нормальные условия. Но все это цинично замалчивается в СМИ государств ЕС. А всю вину за жестокость, творимую в отношении мигрантов, пытаются переложить на Беларусь. Да, на какое-то время можно обмануть общественное мнение, но рано или поздно правда о творимых бесчинствах станет известна, и это станет полным моральным банкротством для тех политических структур, которые сегодня усугубляют эту проблему и не хотят ее решать. В завершение хотелось бы обратиться к коллегам-парламентариям с просьбой об обращении к своим исполнительным властям для того, чтобы прекратить эту ложь и происходящее нарушение законности. В очередной раз мы призываем к совместному поиску вариантов разрешения сложившейся ситуации и защите прав беженцев. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. Denise Karas. Next speaker is Mr. Kyriakos Hariani from Cyprus. I will after that try to give the floor to Mr. Mikita Potorayev from Ukraine again. If he is not there, I will give the floor to Mr. José Asianzi from Spain. Mr. Kyriakos Hariani, Special Representative of Civil Society. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Firstly, allow me to express my appreciation for the work already being carried out by the OSCE field operations in countries neighboring Afghanistan, as well for our authorities in Afghanistan's direct neighbors who have been the first to provide safety to the Afghans who have fled the country. This is why every effort must be made to allocate additional resources to these field missions, as well as to neighboring countries, so as to support them in migration management, as well as in cooperation on terrorist prevention and fight against organized crime. As has already been said, the departure of US and allied forces from Afghanistan has left a huge vacuum. The Taliban, but also other regional powers, have moved to fill that gap, while the while the presence of international organizations on the ground in Afghanistan is extremely limited and faces a host of challenges, cooperation between the OSCE and these organizations must be further intensified to coordinate aid efforts and to continue carry out humanitarian evacuations of Afghan citizens. Furthermore, it is perfectly clear that interacting with the Taliban government is not a favorite option to anyone. However, against the backdrop of the complete deterioration of the socioeconomic situation in Afghanistan, humanitarian assistance alone, especially as winter approaches, will not be enough to avert famine and the major humanitarian crisis, which will have spillover effects in the OSCE area. The Afghan people should not pay the price of the Taliban actions, as the international community is still expected to decide on how to proceed in its relations and contacts with the Taliban government. The OSCE is one of the few international organizations that is present on the ground near Afghanistan. OSCE must be able to have an adequate level of interaction with the authorities in order to be able to monitor for the protection of human rights, to hold the militants their pledges, to stop the country from becoming an exporter of terrorists, and to promote and to provide support to the Afghan population in order to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. I very much hope that in neighboring countries, the civil society will be able to play its part to facilitate OSCE missions work, particularly concerning combating violent extremism and radicalization that leads to terrorism, and in providing support to those who flee the country, and especially women and girls who are in particularly precarious situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kyriakos Hariani. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Mikita Potorayev from Ukraine. The floor is yours.
Okay.
No, we can't hear you, Mr. Mikita. I will go further on the speakers list. Next speaker is Mr. Jose Asensi from Spain. He will be followed by Senator Roger Wicker from USA. Mr. Jose Asensi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Bien, muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Estimados colegas, esta es una ocasión muy importante para debatir sobre un asunto que es el de la situación actual en Afganistán, que es un reto de la mayor importancia para toda la comunidad internacional y que además ha dado un vuelco a la situación política mundial, se puede decir. España está especialmente interesada en este debate, que se trata en este caso de ver qué es lo que puede hacer la OSCE como Organización para la Seguridad y la Cooperación. Sabemos que no tiene demasiados instrumentos en este momento, pero sí es una colaboración importante y este debate debería contribuir, en definitiva, a tener unas ideas más o menos claras por parte de la OSCE de cara a sus responsabilidades en esta situación. La situación ahora mismo es todavía incierta. No sabemos exactamente cómo va a evolucionar. Por parte de España ha habido hasta ahora, dadas las responsabilidades que España tiene y ha tenido, puesto que ha sido uno de los primeros países que estuvo en Afganistán y que ha sido uno de los últimos en salir, pues estamos en el proceso de evacuación. En estos momentos en España hay 2.500 personas que han venido de Afganistán, familias, personas vulnerables, parte de la cooperación, están en situación todavía de resituarse y desde luego el gobierno español está trabajando todavía en algunos países limítrofes con Afganistán, también en Qatar, para una segunda fase de esta llegada de cooperantes y de personas vulnerables y de refugiados. Por lo tanto, esta es una cuestión que sigue siendo importante. España está comprometida en que esta situación se vaya poco a poco resolviendo. Por otra parte, nosotros hemos estado implicados desde el principio en todo lo que significa cooperación en el caso de Afganistán. Y ya lo hicimos cuando estuvimos ahí, unas fuerzas españolas cooperaron con la población de una manera muy efectiva y muy reconocida. Y ahora también estamos en la fase de ver cómo se podría recuperar y potenciar esta cooperación sobre la base, naturalmente, de que la seguridad, la prioridad de la seguridad y la garantía de que la situación en Afganistán puede ser una garantía cierta, que no va a ser Afganistán un centro que pueda suponer una amenaza para la seguridad internacional. Vamos a continuar con los planes de cooperación. Es muy importante también, creo yo, estar presentes en la Conferencia Internacional de Donantes. España está interesada en esto, como está también interesada en el aseguramiento de las garantías de los derechos humanos en Afganistán, especialmente en relación con las mujeres y con las niñas. Estamos interesados también en el acceso libre de la ayuda humanitaria. Naturalmente no podemos estar en una cooperación donde no esté asegurada que la ayuda que va a llegar a sus destinatarios, así como con la libertad de prensa y el respeto a los derechos humanos. España, por tanto, está muy comprometida en este momento y en cooperación, en colaboración, naturalmente, con la Unión Europea, puesto que el marco en el que España va a desenvolverse es el marco que está ya establecido en la Unión Europea a través de las declaraciones del 31 de agosto de este mismo año, en que se ha pronunciado sobre cuáles son, en definitiva, el abanico de medidas en el que podemos nosotros también colaborar. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Mr. Jose Sensei. Next speaker is Senator Roger Wicker from USA. He will be followed by the head of the Armenian delegation, Mr. Edward Aganyayan. Senator Roger Wicker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Satterfeld, and my distinguished friends from the OSCE PA. It's wonderful to be back with you. Let me first say that I want to salute all of the individuals, all of the countries who stood with us and who were our partners during the 20 years of the conflict in Afghanistan. There are various opinions in the United States, differing opinions in the Senate and the Congress as to whether the United States made the correct decision to completely leave Afghanistan. I would have left a residuary force there, and the previous president and the current president chose otherwise. There are debates within the U.S. Congress about this and what this has done to our foreign policy, and that's an internal debate that that we have among Americans, to the extent that some of our allies were disappointed in the information that we provided or in the way that we went about the evacuation. I very much regret that. With regard to where we go from here, I will say that I am a co-sponsor of legislation in the U.S. Senate known as the Afghanistan Counterterrorism Oversight and Accountability Act. It's S 2863. It would provide eight provisions. One, establish a State Department task force on the evacuation of American citizens, legal permanent residents, and special immigrant visa holders. Two, impose oversight mechanisms on the processing of special immigrant visas and refugees. Number three, require strategies for counterterrorism and the disposition of Taliban captured U.S. equipment. Number four, sanction the Taliban and others in Afghanistan for terrorism, drug trafficking, and human rights abuses. Number five, authorize sanctions for those providing support for the Taliban. Number 6, assert that the United States should not recognize any member of the Taliban as ambassador from Afghanistan to the United Nations or ambassador from Afghanistan to the United States. Number 7, require comprehensive review of foreign assistance to entities that support the Taliban, and to place restrictions on non-humanitarian foreign assistance to Afghanistan. I remain concerned about the plight of religious and ethnic minorities within Afghanistan, particularly the Hazaris, minority Shia Muslims, and the persecution of ethnic Tajiks, Uzbeks, and others. And finally, I would urge my colleagues, in light of the fact that Afghanistan has had OSCE partner status in the past, I would hope that it is our position going forward that the Taliban-led government in Afghanistan not be recognized as an OSCE partner for cooperation. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my dear friends for hearing me out on that.
Thank you, Senator Roger Wicker. Next speaker on the list is the head of the Armenian delegation, Eduard Aganyanyan. He will be followed by Special Representative on Disinformation, Mr. Oscar Mina from San Marino. Mr. Eduard Aganyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam President, dear colleagues. The recent developments around Afghanistan have indeed transformed the challenges we have been facing in terms of regional and global security, compounded by concerns over possible violations of human rights, actual and potential new waves of migration, and others. Armenia over the past decade has contributed to the efforts for peace and stability in Afghanistan. The Armenian Peacekeeping Unit carried out its mission in Afghanistan from February 2010 to March 2021 with a total of 3,200 servicemen participating in the mission. The Armenian Peacekeeping Unit was involved in the International Security Assistance Force under the command of the Federal Republic of Germany and ensured the security of the airport of the city of Kunduz. In addition, the Armenian peacekeepers carried out their mission in the military posts of the cities of Kabul, Kunduz, Mazar-e-Sharif. Following the withdrawal of international presence in Afghanistan, we hope that the new government of the country can exercise effective control over the potential irregular armed groups and terrorist fighters and prevent their spillover to the neighboring countries and regions. This is of particular concern for Armenia, in view of the war that Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, launched against Nagorno-Karabakh and its Armenian people last fall. This war saw the involvement of foreign terrorist fighters that Azerbaijan and Turkey had recruited, transferred and deployed from Syria and elsewhere to fight in Nagorno-Karabakh. This was confirmed not only by Armenia, but also a number of other countries and their intelligence services, as well as international investigative journalists, and finally, the foreign terrorist fighters themselves in their testimonies during interrogations and interviews. More than a year after the outbreak of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, the probable presence of those terrorist groups in Nagorno-Karabakh further undermines the already fragile stability in the region. Following this aggressive war of terror against Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan continues the harassment and intimidation politics against the Armenian side by keeping dozens of Armenians as captives in the prisons of Baku, urging the international community to forget about Nagorno-Karabakh in an attempt to cover up the atrocious war and its consequences. This is done with a discourse hailing the end of the conflict. The international community and this parliamentary assembly should put up resistance to this discourse that glorifies war as a means of resolving conflicts. We should also express our support for the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs, France, Russia, and the USA, in their efforts to restart the negotiations for a real peaceful resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. I would like to cite directly the statement of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs as a guideline for us to follow. In their September 21 statements this year, they said, the co-chairs reaffirmed their commitment to continue working with the sides to find comprehensive solutions to all remaining issues related to or resulting from the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in accordance with their mandate. Earlier this year, the co-chairs also stressed that special attention should be paid to the achievement of a final comprehensive and sustainable settlement of the basis of the elements and principles well known to the sides. And you know, dear colleagues, and you, dear colleagues, know that these principles include the right to self-determination of peoples as proclaimed by the Helsinki Final Act and the mandate of the OSCE Minsk Group. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Edward Hagayan. Next speaker is Mr. Oscar Mina from San Marino. He will be followed by Ms. Aygul Kuspan from Kazakhstan. Mr. Oscar Mina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Grazie Presidente, egregi colleghi. La situazione umanitaria e socio-economica in Afghanistan è sull'orlo del collasso e l'abbiamo detto tutti, si parla di milioni di persone, di minori che rischiano la vita senza un'assistenza adeguata. Servono quindi sicuramente modi concreti per aumentare questo sostegno internazionale dell'Unione Europea al popolo afghano, in particolare sulla fornitura dei servizi di base e rafforzare anche la resilienza della società afghana. Va aumentato, dicevamo, l'assistenza, ma questo non sarà sufficiente se vogliamo scongiurare una crisi o una carestia umanitaria di proporzione veramente elevate, in quanto credo sia fondamentale, oltre alla fornitura di ciò che potremo fare a livello di aiuti umanitari, creare anche questi corridoi per gli afghani che vogliono lasciare il paese, garantire l'accesso agli aiuti umanitari, tutelare i diritti umani, inclusi quelli delle donne e delle minoranze, nonché la necessità di evitare poi che i terroristi usino il suolo afghano per minacciare paesi terzi, per non vedere poi ovviamente i flussi migratori incontrollati verso i paesi limitrofi, con una conseguente ed inevitabile destabilizzazione geopolitica. Serve quindi una solidarietà internazionale ed un multilateralismo concreto con un approccio calibrato per dare un sostegno diretto alla popolazione afghana al fine di prevenire questa catastrofe umanitaria. Sono concetti che ormai hanno preso un po' il sopravvento tra tutti noi, ma credo che sia importante affrontare in questa maniera. Noi come piccolo paese, la Repubblica di San Marino, ultimamente in questo periodo ha approvato un ordine del giorno, ovvero il Parlamento l'ha approvato all'unanimità, in cui supporta e sollecita tutti gli sforzi in tutte le sedi internazionali, a partire dalle Nazioni Unite, per garantire la pace e la realizzazione di un processo politico unitario in Afghanistan, inclusivo di tutte le componenti che garantisca la difesa della Costituzione e a porre in essere ogni azione utile al fine di sostenere l'apertura di corridoi umanitari, quello che dicevo prima, e di ogni altra iniziativa per garantire la tutela e l'accoglienza della popolazione, in particolare quelli in fuga da queste aree così colpite da questa cosiddetta carestia. Con una particolare attenzione a donne e minori, ci vogliamo attivare anche noi con le nostre piccole modalità anche a valutare appunto questa accoglienza chiaramente consone alla nostra realtà territoriale e statale. E su questo credo che saremo sicuramente molto attivi in tutti gli organismi. Ringrazio ancora il Presidente per avermi dato la parola e la saluto cordialmente. Arrivederci.
Thank you, Mr. Oscar Mina. Next speaker is Ms. Aygul Kuspan from Kazakhstan. She will be followed by the head of the Netherlands delegation, Ms. Farah Karimi. Ms. Aygul Kuspan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Безопасность Центральноазиатского региона напрямую связана с ситуацией в Афганистане. Полное возвращение Афганистана к мирной жизни является одним из неизменных приоритетов внешней политики Казахстана. Так было во время нашего председательства в ОБСЕ в 2010 году, так было в рамках нашего членства в Совете Безопасности ООН в 2017-2018 годах. А в 2019 году, напомню, мы провели в Нур-Султане круглый стол на тему «Афганистан и ОБСЕ. Создание возможностей для партнерства и сотрудничества». Казахстан продолжает активно сотрудничать с агентствами ООН по преодолению гуманитарного кризиса в Афганистане. Так, Всемирная продовольственная программа закупила 20 тысяч тонн казахстанской муки для Афганистана, а по поручению президента Токаева Казахстан направил 5 тысяч тонн муки в Афганистан в виде гуманитарной помощи. Казахстан продолжает выделять гранты на обучение афганской молодежи в ведущих казахстанских университетах. Как вы знаете, по инициативе первого президента Казахстана Нурсултана Назарбаева с 2010 по 2017 год была успешно реализована образовательная программа обучения тысячи афганских студентов в казахстанских университетах на сумму $80 миллионов. Кроме того, в 2019 году по инициативе Казахстана и при содействии Европейского Союза и программы развития ООН была запущена программа по обучению афганских девушек в казахстанских университетах. К ней также присоединились Узбекистан и Кыргызстан. В казахстанские университеты было принято 40 студенток, девушек из Афганистана. Сегодня в 25 университетах Казахстана обучается 397 афганских студентов, из них 166 по казахстанским грантам. Несмотря на изменения ситуации в Афганистане, Казахстан продолжает выдавать визы и продлевать визы афганским студентам, в том числе вновь поступившим и выпускникам 2021 года. Очевидно, что в постконфликтный период Афганистану потребуется дальнейшая поддержка международного сообщества, в первую очередь со стороны структур ООН. С учетом недавнего размещения в Алматы миссии ООН по содействию Афганистану, ЮНАМА, и инициатива Казахстана о создании регионального центра ООН в Алматы приобретает конкретные формы. Республика Казахстан выступает за становление Афганистана в качестве независимого, нейтрального, единого, мирного, демократического и процветающего государства. Мы выступаем за сохранение сложившихся региональных торгово-экономических, транспортно-логистических и энергетических связей с Афганистаном. В ходе недавнего визита нашего спецпредставителя по международному сотрудничеству господина Казыхана в Кабул такой подход был поддержан, горячо поддержан администрацией Афганистана. В завершение хочу подчеркнуть, что Казахстан продолжит вносить свой вклад в международные усилия в целях оказания гуманитарного содействия Афганистану и скорейшей стабилизации в этой стране. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aygul Kuspan. Next speaker is Ms. Farah Karimi. She will be followed by Ms. Claudia Freidel from Switzerland. Ms. Farah Karimi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and good afternoon and good morning to all colleagues. Over the past 2 decades, the Afghan people have hoped and worked for realization of a democratic, rights-based country where people could live together in peace. The Afghan population is unfortunately going through a nightmare. The failure of the international community, NATO alliance, and the US to deliver on their promises to the Afghan people is primarily a tragedy for Afghan women and men. Besides, it is a very serious failure in the global war on terrorism. There are more terrorists in the world than ever before. And in Afghanistan, the Taliban have taken over government through brutal terrorist attacks in recent years. In particular, women's rights and human rights defenders, judges, lawyers, intellectuals, and security forces were targeted by these attacks. In the last few months, I have had many conversations with Afghans who have been left behind, disgruntled and distressed in the intolerable and violent world of the Taliban. Economy has collapsed, there is insecurity, lack of freedom, serious violation of human rights, and a severe humanitarian crisis is going on. It was mentioned by many of speakers before me. Also, veterans, service members from the NATO countries who have lost their comrades, who themselves or their fellow combatants are scarred for their life by physical and mental wounds, they all ask, all this happened for nothing? Madam President, politicians must be held accountable. And I would like to say to Honorable Senator Wicker that this is not only an internal American debate. The impact of decisions made by American presidents actually impact seriously all of us. What lessons do we learn from this massive debacle? What does this mean for military interventions, for democratizations and human rights? Our ad hoc committee on migration organized a meeting on the situation in Afghanistan last September. During this meeting, the representatives of International Organization for Migration and Norwegian Refugee Council were clear about the very urgent humanitarian situation. People are dying. That was their message. Humanitarian aid to people by the UN organizations and the NGOs present in Afghanistan needs to be prioritized. In addition, there can be no recognition of Taliban until there is an inclusive government and respect for the rights of girls and women. First of all, education must be accessible to girls at all levels. Conversations that take place with the Taliban via their neighboring countries and governments in the region must have all this as a message. Afghans fleeing the country in search for safety and security will initially move to neighboring countries, and some of them will continue the journey from there onto the European countries. Neighboring countries need full support for a dignified reception of refugees, including long-term integration and inclusion in their societies. However, European countries cannot leave the reception of refugees only to neighboring countries of Afghanistan. We need in our own countries also a generous reception policy towards Afghan refugees. Finally, President Sedefeld, I have a request to you as the first female president of this assembly. I would like to ask you to consider a visit by you and a delegation of female members of this assembly to Afghanistan, with the aim of supporting women in Afghanistan who are constantly asking for international solidarity. The fate of Afghan women cannot be left solely to the Taliban and the religious extremists who treat them as second-class people. I hope I can count on your support and support of my male and female colleagues. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Farah Karimi. And I am actually the second female president. The first one was Ms. Christine Muttonen from Austria. So we are two women who I hold it and she have held it, the position as president of OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And I will take your proposal under consideration. I have been in Afghanistan 4 years ago. And I think it's important with solidarity with all the women and the girls in Afghanistan. I am totally agree with you. Next speaker is Ms. Claudia Friedel from Switzerland. She will be followed by the head of the Finnish delegation, Mr. William Junila. Ms. Claudia Friedel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, meine liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, jetzt nach 20 Jahren sind die internationalen Militärkräfte aus Afghanistan abgezogen. Wir haben die Schilderungen heute schon gehört. Die humanitäre Lage im Land ist desaströs. Gut die Hälfte der Bevölkerung, circa 20 Millionen Personen, sind auf Hilfe angewiesen. Frau Moborne und viele andere haben heute schon darauf hingewiesen. Die afghanische Bevölkerung braucht alles: Unterkunft, Nahrung, Wasser, Medikamente. Diese dringenden Bedürfnisse erfordern eine rasche humanitäre Reaktion der Staatengemeinschaft. Es braucht eine massive finanzielle Unterstützung. Die Schweiz wird 2021 voraussichtlich 60 Millionen Franken für die Bevölkerung in Afghanistan und in die Nachbarländer, welche Flüchtlinge aufnehmen, bereitstellen. Das wird kaum reichen und auch im kommenden Jahr wird die internationale Gemeinschaft gefordert sein. Eine Herausforderung ist, dass die Hilfsgüter wirklich vor Ort ankommen. Der Flughafen Kabul kann nur einen begrenzten Betrieb sicherstellen. Schon heute stauen sich die Lastwagen an den Grenzen. Es ist Aufgabe unserer Länder, Grenzübergänge für die humanitären Lieferungen offen zu halten, damit die vor Ort verweilenden Hilfsorganisationen die Hilfsgüter auch wirklich verteilen können. Für den ungehinderten Zugang der humanitären Hilfe braucht es ein Zugeständnis der Taliban. Keine einfache Aufgabe, denn das Geld oder die Waren sollen nicht in ihre Hände fallen. Denn parallel zur humanitären Krise treten seit der Machtübernahme der Taliban Verstöße gegen die Menschenrechte auf. So wurde der Zugang für Mädchen und junge Frauen zu Bildung stark eingeschränkt oder ganz verboten. Menschen werden verfolgt und grundlos getötet. Afghanistan war Teil der asiatischen Kooperationspartner der OSZE. Unsere Organisation kann in dieser Krise eine Rolle zukommen als Plattform für den Austausch von Erfahrungen und bewährten Praktiken, sowie als Forum für die notwendige Diskussion über die Situation der Flüchtlinge und die Einhaltung der Menschenrechte. Die OSZE-Länder dürfen nicht wegschauen. Ich danke Ihnen für Ihr Engagement und auch für die Vorschläge, die gerade vorher von Frau Farab Karimi gemacht wurden, die sehr, sehr wichtig sind.
Thank you, Ms. Claudia Friedel. Next speaker is Mr. Wilhelm Junila from Finland. He will be followed by Ms. Jasmine Pozio from Sweden. Mr. Wilhelm Junila, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, Deputy Secretary General, dear colleagues, when a multinational coalition to fight the terrorism was formed in 2001, there was some opposition among the participating states. When President Trump first proposed the withdrawal, it was faced with backlash from many of the same sources. Obviously, there is no way to please everyone, but some of the criticism regarding the withdrawal is a little bit out of place and some would say naive. There was and there remains a strong support to end the war in Afghanistan. Of course, no one thought it would go like this. Except for some intelligence agents who were in a minority at the time. We know the Biden administration was unprepared to perform a controlled withdrawal from Afghanistan. That can be criticized. But what we really should do at the OSCE is to accept the current circumstances and prepare ourselves to handle a new security situation. What we are facing today is not limited to a humanitarian crisis. It's not limited to increasing national security issues in our own countries. And it's not limited to the uncertainty that the Taliban has brought upon us. There have been good speeches on these topics today, and I would especially like to thank Mr. Hudson for his remarks, and of course, Ms. Yrjölä and Ms. Kauma for their expertise. In addition to various security threats, we have a situation where we have to work with the Taliban at some point. That is inevitable. That comes with consequences, and I urge the participating states to show caution. This process must not be rushed until conditions set forth by the international community have been met. Another problem that is not discussed too often is using of the foreign terrorist fighters in several areas, fighting proxy wars. Severe consideration should be expressed by participating states to cease such a custom, and because it propels instability beyond the borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilhelm Junela. Next speaker is Ms. Jasmine Posio from Sweden. She will be followed by Mr. Mehmet Said Kirasoglu from Turkey. Ms. Jasmine Posio, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ambassador Tuula Yrjölä, for the interesting and important keynote address. The situation in Afghanistan is overwhelmingly horrific. The hunger, poverty, and lack of security was a problem before the troops were withdrawn and has increased with the Taliban taking over the power. Of course, we cannot accept coup d'etats, but at the same time, the population is suffering and needs our support. As many speakers have said before me, it is crucial that we find ways to deliver humanitarian aid that is needed, but also development aid so that children still can get educated and women have their rights met. As international actors, we have a particular responsibility for ensuring the needs and rights of the Afghan people after 20 years of failed military interventions. When discussing security in Afghanistan, I just have to address the abdominal phenomenon of men's violence against women that increases during conflict. Not only domestic violence, but the use of sexual violence against women that is used as a weapon in conflicts is also a big threat to the women and girls of Afghanistan. As it is now, it is very difficult for us to deliver the much needed support, but we can lead by being good examples. At the very least, all member countries within the Council of Europe should adopt the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, also known as the Istanbul Convention. All of our parliaments have to discuss these issues, put proper laws into place, and finally implement the laws so that no woman or girl will ever have to live through violent and/or sexual assaults and finally feel free and safe in the society. I am very glad that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is having a web dialogue on violence against women journalists and politicians on Wednesday next week, and look forward to seeing all of you then. This web dialogue is far too important for us to miss. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jasmine Posio. Next speaker is Mr. Mehmet Said Kirasoglu from Turkey. He will be followed by Ms. Dusica Stojkovic from Serbia. Mr. Mehmet Said Kirasoglu, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chairman. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your assignment, and I wish you success in your endeavors. First of all, we fully deny the so-called accusations of the Armenian side. To ensure a sustainable peace and stability in Southern Caucasus has always been the priority of Turkey and Azerbaijan. So we will continue with our constructive efforts, but we could never receive a positive response to our efforts so far, unfortunately. This new situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, this new political stance is actually a good opportunity for all the countries in the region. What happened in Nagorno-Karabakh is fully in line with international law, with the sovereignty rights of Azerbaijan, and as well as the resolutions of the United Nations, and that occupation, which has lasted for 30 years, had been ended by the Azeri powers. That's all that has happened in the region. Within this framework, I would like to state that no country could accuse Turkey of supporting terrorism, because Turkey has been leading a fight against terrorism for more than 40 years, and especially the developments in Syria and Iraq has forced Turkey to become the only NATO member that fights face-to-face the ISIS militia, making them inefficient and contributing to the prevention of combating international terrorism. So the actual issue of today's session is Afghanistan. The recent developments in Afghanistan is creating a political, economic, and humanitarian crisis in the region, triggering a massive flow of migration. And this irregular migration will definitely have great impact on the OSCE region. Turkey is right now hosting 4 million irregular migrants and does not have the opportunity or the capacity to bear a new influx of refugees. However, it goes without saying that right now in Afghanistan, there are more than 18 million people who are in need of urgent humanitarian aid, and there are 12 million people who are in urgent need of food. Therefore, these should be met with the overall contribution of all the countries and Afghan people. A new influx of migration of Afghani people should be prevented, and their needs should be met. Winter is coming, and we should act before winter comes. And unless we take the relevant precautions, the situation will be even worse. The Afghan refugees will not only go to the neighboring countries, but the challenges that they face should be borne not only by Turkey, should be well perceived by all the relevant countries. The responsibilities and the financial burden should be shared. After all, Turkey has welcomed the most of Afghan refugees and had borne, and these countries should not be left to more risks. Within this framework, we do believe that the OSCE's activities are very important, and we urge the member countries to work in closer coordination and synergy. These are innocent people, and their lives are entirely dependent on urgent aid. Therefore, we call for an international collaboration and cooperation to provide the Afghan people with the relevant humanitarian aid that they are in urgent need of. This is the only way to establish peace and stability in the region. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Mehmet Said Kirasoglu. Next speaker is Ms. Dusika Stojkovic from Serbia. She will be followed by Mr. Radu Mihai Milai from Romania. Ms. Dusika Stojkovic, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleague. The wave of migration spilling over from Afghanistan will undoubtedly hit the countries bordering with Afghanistan, such as Iraq and Pakistan, and also the Turkey, as my previous colleague mentioned, but also will affect on other part of Europe and also the other part of Asia. People afraid, judging by the testimony of UN High Commissioner for Refugees, people in Afghanistan are afraid for their safety, the safety of their families under the rule of Taliban. As far as Serbia is concerned, we have a request from women and girls from sport clubs seeking asylum in Serbia, but the most common destination for people from Afghanistan are not Serbia. They're wondering to go to Germany, Belgium, and France, and also United States, because a large number of their compatriots and relatives live there. Being a woman, I share the opinion with previous colleague, Ms. Karimi and Ms. Posio. Being a woman and girl or a child under the rule of Taliban is very hard due to the problems. It's not only related to security, but also concerning violation of fundamental human rights and freedoms, violence, abuse, as well as the economic crisis that hit the country and the people. The currency crisis is also expected because the increasingly number of people in Afghanistan are converting the currency Afghani into dollar. When we speak about Serbia, we signed a joint statement of the United States Department calling all states to respect and support the safe and organized departure of foreign nationals and Afghans who want to leave the country. Finally, now more than ever is necessary to give the active role and importance of OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. I believe that our role must be stronger and visible in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dusika Stojkovic. Next speaker is Mr. Radu Mihail from Romania. He will be followed by Ms. Lilit Galstian from Armenia. Mr. Radu Mihail, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to have the opportunity to share with you today our views on the situation in Afghanistan. The fast-moving situation on the ground is more than worrying, hence the need to continue to monitor the terrorist threats and the security developments in the region, while providing through various channels the Afghan population with direct support, aiming to avoid a humanitarian disaster. Cooperation and coordination with other regional actors are essential and should add meaningful value to the stabilization efforts. The OSCE member states in the region are key factors of stability and require our full support in maintaining the democratic, conflict-free path and provide the right examples to follow. The formation in Afghanistan of a new inclusive and representative government, expressing the will and aspiration of all Afghans and respecting human rights, especially the rights of women, children, and minorities, would represent an important benchmark. But unfortunately, this is not in sight for the moment. After 20 years of financial aid and significant presence on the ground, Romania will continue to remain engaged in actions and initiatives meant to support the Afghan population. Romania evacuated 156 Afghans and their family members, which will be granted protection by the Romanian authorities. 139 are already in Romania and have the possibility to receive political asylum at their request. Emergency funds have been allocated for their expenses for initial accommodation and basic needs. Romania has also increased the support to UN humanitarian response with an emphasis on the World Food Programme actions. We believe that all these initiatives are the ones who need to be generalized so that the impact of the international community and its effort is maximized, and it gives the Afghan people strong signals that they are not left alone. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Radu Mihail. Next speaker is Ms. Lilit Galstian from Armenia. She will be followed by Ms. Gwen Moore from USA. Ms. Lilit Galstian, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Honorable President, ladies and gentlemen, although our focus is Afghanistan and it requires urgent actions to prevent the region from new confrontations and to reach long-lasting solutions, the security challenges in South Caucasus region are just as vital, and they require well-balanced decisions based on international law and principles. As an organization with a wide range of security-related responsibilities, I would like to drive your attention on the new realities around Armenia and Artsakh Republic. Almost 1 year ago, Armenia and Artsakh faced the aggression unleashed by Azerbaijan with the direct participation of Turkey and Turkish-backed foreign terrorists. Violating international human rights and laws, the Azerbaijani army committed horrendous crimes using chemical weapons, targeting civilian infrastructures, as well as vandalizing and destroying the Armenian cultural and religious heritage on the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. The November 9 statement signed 1 year ago stopped the aggression, but security issues still remain outstanding. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is not resolved. What's more, for almost 5 months, the Azerbaijani troops breaking the state borders are keeping Armenia's territories occupied. Unfortunately, the OSCE has remained silent or has been unable to condemn the actions of Azerbaijan and Turkey against the people of Artsakh. We have also warned the OSCE and its participating states that if we fail to address the issue properly and decisively, we will be having more and more cases of the use of foreign terrorist fighters and jihadists as a means for projecting power and promoting political goals in the OSCE area. Finally, reaffirming the well-known principles of the Helsinki Final Act, I would like to stress that the right of the people of Artsakh to self-determination cannot be considered resolved through aggression. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict awaits its just resolution under the auspices of the Minsk Group co-chairs, which must include the determination of the status of Artsakh on the basis of the realization by the people of Artsakh of their right to self-determination, the guaranteed safe and dignified return of displaced population to their homes, and the preservation of the region's historical and religious heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, we can prevent current and upcoming crimes and violations only standing against the nowadays crimes and violations. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Lilith Galstian. Next speaker is Ms. Gwen Moore from USA. She will be followed by Mr. Yves Perron from Canada. Ms. Gwen Moore, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I'm so pleased to join my colleagues today to discuss the future of Afghanistan and how we can engage to help ensure security, stability, and respect for basic human rights. You know, the United States and its allies succeeded in evacuating well over 120,000 people from Afghanistan, including not only their own citizens and residents, but also Afghans at risk of being targeted by the Taliban, such as human rights and women's rights activists, women and politicians, journalists, and others. Now we must look ahead and support those who remain in Afghanistan, particularly the women and girls who bear the brunt of the Taliban's draconian policies. In a recent visit with Afghan evacuees being hosted in my state of Wisconsin here in the United States, I had the opportunity to speak to some of these women who are truly resilient. They were professional women, and I was encouraged by our conversation, but I also know that they share our concerns about the future of their country. I want to thank our partner countries that are working to help permanently resettle these evacuees and urge other OSCE countries to help welcome vulnerable Afghans, including women. But resettlement is not the last option. We must continue to press for the protection of these women in their own country. Over the past almost 20 years, women's rights had advanced in Afghanistan. Afghanistan ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 2003. Many women received an education, got a job, or felt free to play on a sports team. I met these women, and one was a doctor, one was a journalist, one was in government. They even felt free to play on a sports team. Now, many women are staying home out of fear. The Taliban has warned women to stay home from work for their own safety, their jobs, their businesses, their studies, and their dreams for the future are all but gone. The Taliban have reneged on promises they made to respect women's rights and instead are treating women much as they did in the 1990s. They're shutting women out of employment and girls out of schools. In September, the Taliban abolished the Ministry of Women's Affairs and brought back the Ministry of Vice and Virtue, which in the 1990s ruthlessly enforced restrictions on women and men through public beatings and barred women from educating girls, even in their own homes. In recent weeks, we have heard terrible reports of forced marriages, rape, and even killing. Then last month, the Taliban told female government workers in Kabul not to come to their jobs. They have also fired women journalists from state media. Women's sports have been banned, and many female athletes fled the country out of fear for their own safety. Education for girls is under severe threat. Girls have not been allowed back to secondary school. Taliban issued guidelines on how women can attend university require strict gender segregation that may not be possible to implement. And they may go even further by cutting off that avenue altogether. Some Afghan women have refused to accept these draconian restrictions. However, their protests in defense of education for girls and freedom of movement for women have been met by violence in the streets of Kabul and other cities. We must continue to support the women and girls of Afghanistan. Our countries must do so in every engagement we have with the officials from that country. We must speak out and denounce the Taliban behavior. We must also require that any international recognition of the Taliban or even discussions about possible recognition be strictly tied to demonstrated respect for the human rights of women and girls, among other conditions and priorities, such as not allowing Afghanistan to be a safe haven for terror groups. Finally, I would like to raise a point of specific concern. I remain concerned about the fate of Afghanistan's female parliamentarians. I have had the pleasure of meeting with many of these remarkable women over the past decade to discuss the challenges they face, and we must all face as women legislators in our respective governments. Even in the best of times during the past 2 decades, our positions made them targets. And now, many may have already fled the country, and who remain are certainly likely to be targeted by the Taliban. I would like to propose that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly establish and robustly fund a project to monitor and assist Afghanistan's women parliamentarians. And with that, I would yield back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gwen Moore. Next speaker is Mr. Yves Perron from Canada. He will be followed by Mr. Nestor Sufrushi from Ukraine. Mr. Yves Perron, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Chers délégués, je tiens à vous remercier pour cette occasion de participer à cette importante discussion. Notre contribution au fil des années, tout comme celle de l'OSCE et de ses membres, témoigne de notre engagement envers la stabilité de l'Afghanistan et le respect des droits fondamentaux de tous ses habitants. Cependant, la reprise du pouvoir par les talibans, un groupe considéré comme terroriste au Canada, est extrêmement préoccupante. La rapidité avec laquelle ils ont progressé sur le territoire et se sont emparés de Kaboul doit assurément amener la communauté internationale à s'interroger sur l'efficacité des interventions extérieures. Il est essentiel que l'Afghanistan ne redevienne jamais le sanctuaire de terrorisme qu'il a été dans le passé. L'extrémisme violent et la radicalisation qui mènent au terrorisme demeurent des menaces dont aucun pays ou aucune région n'est à l'abri, et cela demande une réponse globale et étroitement coordonnée. En tant que législateurs, nous avons la responsabilité de travailler sans relâche pour améliorer la coordination et la coopération afin de lutter efficacement contre le terrorisme, particulièrement dans les périodes d'instabilité et d'incertitude. C'est dans ce contexte difficile que nous devons tous nous interroger sur la façon dont nous pouvons continuer d'aider le peuple afghan. Le pays est sur le point d'imploser si nous ne faisons rien, ce qui risque de déstabiliser la région entière et vraisemblablement même l'Europe. Selon le Programme alimentaire mondial, 23 millions d'Afghans sont au bord de la famine en raison des changements climatiques et des conflits, en plus de la situation économique désastreuse qui prévaut. Il faut donc agir et je rejoins en ce sens Mme Fry qui a parlé un peu plus tôt et je lui offre ma collaboration pour ça. Mais il faudra aussi assurer l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire qui est essentielle. Et plus important encore, cette aide vitale doit parvenir aux personnes les plus vulnérables, sans entrave ni restriction. Je pense en particulier aux femmes et aux filles, ainsi qu'aux minorités persécutées, pour qui accéder à l'aide peut être plus difficile. Il faut absolument éviter que cette aide ne soit détournée au profit du régime. Nous avons l'obligation de tout mettre en œuvre pour protéger ces personnes vulnérables, surtout les femmes, dont les droits ne sont désormais plus assurés et dont la vie est même parfois menacée. Nous devons poursuivre nos efforts afin d'assurer l'accès aux travailleurs humanitaires ainsi qu'à l'aide des agences des Nations Unies et des organisations non gouvernementales sur place. Je veux aussi souligner que des milliers de citoyens afghans ont appuyé les alliés lors de notre engagement dans ce pays. Assurer le passage en toute sécurité des ressortissants étrangers ainsi que des Afghans qui ont soutenu les troupes est important et nécessite une collaboration entre nous tous. Il faut également que tous les citoyens afghans qui souhaitent quitter le pays puissent le faire librement et en toute sécurité. Nous avons la responsabilité de ne laisser personne derrière. Je vous remercie. Passons à une action concertée. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yves Perron. Next speaker is Mr. Nestor Sufrush from Ukraine. He will be followed by Ms. Karapetayan from Armenia. Mr. Nestor Sufrush, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, he's not here. So we can move on to the next.
Next speaker is Ms. Mariah Karapetyan from Armenia. She will be followed by Mr. Steve Cohen from USA. Ms. Maria Karapetyan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable President Satterfeld, dear colleagues. We're holding this discussion on the topic of current security challenges with a focus on Afghanistan, and I express my solidarity with the people of Afghanistan and hope that soon they will find a way out of the dark and uncertain times that they have been submerged in for such a long time. And we all in the international community need to do our best to support the people of Afghanistan in finding peace. We're also talking about challenges that the global community faces. And here, of course, one of the most pressing issues, if not the most pressing issue, is to contain the spillover of terrorists and mercenaries. And here we need to look at which actors are likely to provide routes for this spillover. It is here that what happened during last year's war against Nagorno-Karabakh in the South Caucasus is extremely important to keep in everyone's attention. Last fall, Azerbaijan and Turkey transported terrorists and mercenaries from Syria to fight a war against Nagorno-Karabakh. And since the MP from Turkey denied this, and it is very likely that the MP from Azerbaijan will deny this as well, I would like to draw your attention that it is not only Armenia that speaks of this. On October 2 last year, at the beginning of the war, the president of France said the following: "I can assure that more than 300 Syrian Islamist militants earlier taken out of the Aleppo zone were deployed in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone via Turkey's Gaziantep. This is a confirmed fact. Those people have been identified and tracked down. All of them have links with the Islamic State terrorist group," end of quote. On November 3 last year, towards the end of the Nagorno-Karabakh war, the foreign minister of Russia said the following: "We, of course, are concerned over the internationalization of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the involvement of militants from the Middle East. We have repeatedly called on external players to use their capacities to prevent the transfer of mercenaries, whose number in the conflict zone is already reaching 2,000 according to the existing data. So no matter how many times colleagues from Azerbaijan and Turkey call what we say baseless accusations, it's not only Armenia that talks of this, but also the international community. This parliamentary assembly is often abused by MPs from Azerbaijan to build a seemingly constructive and peace-oriented facade for Azerbaijan to cover up last year's war and the ongoing aggressive rhetoric and actions that Azerbaijan deploys on the ground. And in reality, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, is sabotaging any agenda that could contribute to de-escalation and peace. To move towards peace and regional collaboration, we all need to urge Azerbaijan to bring its actions and rhetoric at home in line with the constructive and peace-oriented texts that we hear in this parliamentary assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maria Karapetyan. Next speaker is Mr. Steve Cohen from USA. He will be followed by Mr. Yusuf Bayser from Turkey. Mr. Steve Cohen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honored to be with all of you on these important subjects. I think Congressman Hudson spoke earlier, one of my colleagues, and he pointed out in his opening statement that we must be concerned about terrorist threats in Afghanistan. Not necessarily, not the Taliban, who we thought was a terrorist threat, but from ISIS-K. ISIS-K is present, and they're a terrorist threat to the people of Afghanistan and to the Taliban as well, and it could be a threat to us. I condemn in the strongest terms ISIS-K's attack on the Kabul airport, August 26th, and killed hundreds of people, I believe, but 13 of our soldiers in particular. Scores of Afghan citizens, if not hundreds, were killed in that attack there. And then recently they've attacked a hospital in Kabul and killed many, many more. They've hit a mosque, I believe, outside of Kabul, and they've done other terrorist activities. It's clear the situation remains quite dire, and we must do all we can to prevent any further episodes and loss of innocent lives at the hands of terrorist groups. Taliban's got their hands full. As most of you know, ruling and being in power, not as easy as being outside. more difficult to have to operate when you're in charge. International cooperation is crucial for this, particularly as most of us no longer have embassies in Afghanistan. I'm concerned about the fate of individuals who work for the United States but were not able to be evacuated in August, as well as those who may be targeted because of their work, such as journalists. We had many interpreters that helped us during the efforts when we were there, and many of them are still in danger. We must continue to work to allow those who work for us and our allies to seek safety in other countries. And in September, I wrote to President Biden, urging him to ensure that employees of the U.S. Agency for Global Media and their families who had not been evacuated in August are provided with immediate safe passage out of August. I understand 2/3 of about 100 Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty journalists and the dependents who, due to their U.S. employment, face significant threats from the Taliban have been evacuated, about 2/3, but 1/3 are still there. That's not enough. Many remain to not have international travel documents such as passports. They're under threat in Afghanistan. The Taliban will not allow persons to travel without those travel documents. So I urge all of you, and I'm sure you are with your governments, providing necessary documentation of those individuals who need to be evacuated to ensure their safety out of Afghanistan. Journalists inside Afghanistan remain in serious danger. 150 media companies have reportedly been shut down. Taliban policies concerning media are unclear. They're no great fan of independent journalism at a minimum. What they speak about media freedom is nuanced at best. And RFE and RL folks have reported over the past weeks that remaining journalists have been questioned by armed Taliban and door-to-door searches. So it's a tough place over there. And I'd like to add my voice to those who express their concern about the situation for women and girls. It's awful what's occurred. The women and the girls got an opportunity, and now it's being taken away. It's just, it's heart-wrenching. Women have been shut out of their workplaces, girls out of schools, and restrictions on freedom of movement. It's not acceptable. Gender equality and gender opportunity should be a priority, and it is a priority of the OSCE, and it's most in jeopardy in Afghanistan. We must hold the Taliban responsible for violations of human rights there. We speak out for women's rights, for media freedom, all other fundamental freedoms and human rights. We cannot abandon the people of Afghanistan, and I know we won't. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Steve Cohen. Next speaker is Mr. Yusuf Peyser from Turkey. He will be followed by Mr. Tural Kanyalyev from Azerbaijan. Mr. Yusuf Peyser, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Distinguished counterparts and colleagues, I first of all would like to thank the speeches of the presidents, the chairpersons of the three general committees, and I would like to thank each and every one of them. We have repeatedly mentioned our discourse that is focusing on the future of our region. However, we once again realized that it is not met by Armenia. Armenia occupied Azerbaijan that lasted over 30 years, and 715,000 Azerbaijani nationals have been displaced from their territories. Therefore, I believe it's not accurate for the Azerbaijani colleagues to make false accusations. It's not humanitarian. If we want sustainable peace and solidarity in the Southern Caucasia, we need to follow the rhetorics, but this is what we pledge to, and the realities are known by all. The 30-year-long occupation is known by all. Turkey is the part of the international coalition to fight against the ISIS, and we are a co-chair in the OSCE, under the OSCE umbrella as well. Therefore, our country cannot accept the false accusations by its nature. Turkey leads all the other countries that call for normalization in the region, and we invite Armenia to focus on and invest in the regional cooperation projects rather than claiming false accusations. Madam Chair and distinguished colleagues, just like in any other country, we see human rights. We see that in Afghanistan, in the name of human rights, peace, and democracy, occupations continue for over 40 years due to the internal conflicts and external interventions, we see now social, economic, and political instability, and the country is now being mentioned with terrorism, unfortunately. And it is obvious that Afghanistan is the country that is suffering from the fight against terrorism and the terrorism itself in the most destructive manner. After the withdrawal of the United States and NATO from Afghanistan, and after Taliban taking over the ruling of the country, we see that the region is now facing fractures and tensions. Therefore, we believe that the ongoing developments in that region will affect the Central Asia up until the Sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, Europe is not an exemption from this, and it will have to face these challenges as well. Unfortunately, the interim government's pledged inclusiveness is not meeting the expectations, and I believe that with the establishment of an inclusive and efficient government formed in Afghanistan, this inclusive stability will be established. The visit of the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Afghanistan interim government, Emirhan Muttaqi, paid a visit to Turkey on the 14th and 15th of October, which I believe will help Turkey increase its engagement and increase its ability to convey the message. This visit does not mean that we recognize Taliban. We believe that one should not rush into recognizing Taliban. The humanitarian crisis and the economic collapse is deepening every passing day, which can actually further increase the instability in the risky country. Without an entry of monetary funds and help in terms of healthcare and education by the United Nations, we believe that the existing governmental structures will collapse even further. We believe education and healthcare institutions should be backed and supported in a concrete manner in order to increase.
We lost you, Mr. Yusuf Pasha.
Actually, right now, continue exerting efforts in order to have a permanent peace and stability. We need all the countries should take responsibility. Therefore, we believe that all countries should side with Afghanistan in solidarity, and the humanitarian aid should be continued by all the countries to be conveyed to Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf Pasha. It's written in the chat. There is only one more speaker on the list, and it's not 5 o'clock yet. So it's still possible to be added to the speakers list. Any of you, dear colleagues, wants to have the floor, please write in the speakers list. We will have time until 5 minutes to 5, and I need the last minutes to close the meeting. So it means that there are 20 more minutes to speak. If you want to have the floor, please write in the chat function as soon as possible. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Tural Ganyaliev from Azerbaijan. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank you, and I would like to underline that we are, as Azerbaijan, we are interested in stable security situation in Afghanistan, because security and stability in Afghanistan are closely interlinked with the overall security environment in the wider region, and all of us must come together to help the people of Afghanistan to overcome this challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, frankly speaking, I wanted to dedicate all my speech to the security situation in and around in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, some members of neighboring country made me change my plans and to add some points to my intervention. Frankly speaking, I want to say that these baseless accusations of our neighboring country against Azerbaijan is unacceptable, because dear neighbors, today the topic of this meeting is Afghanistan, not some imaginary non-existent place that you have invented. And of course, it is pathetic to hear that after what happened in our region, after 30 years of occupation, it's frankly speaking very surprising and deplorable to listen to the members of neighboring country talking the same text, speaking the same text over and over again. For example, the member of the delegation, the leader of Armenian delegation, delivered the same speech that he had delivered yesterday in the standing committee. The same goes to the other members of Armenian delegation. Frankly speaking, it doesn't help at all. This is not serious. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, this is the organization which is called the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. So this is cooperation in Europe, not the confrontation. So I would like to invite my members of Armenian delegation to be more pragmatic, to be more constructive. Frankly speaking, this schoolboy methodology approach to the situation does not look good at all. And if you look from beside, it's not good at all, because this is a platform that has been provided for all of us to discuss and to debate over the situation in Afghanistan. And what we are seeing today is, again, the same non-constructive allegations made by the Armenian delegation. And of course, this also the imaginary non-existent entity that Armenian colleagues talked about. Let me remind you that there is only one Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, and it's confirmed by the international organizations. If you just Google it, if you just look at the international instruments, the resolutions, documents adopted by various international organizations, you will see it. So I would like to invite Armenians to open their eyes wide. Azerbaijan has restored its internationally recognized territories and the war is over. So now this organization, this constructive organization, the OSCE PA, we have to use this opportunity to speak about the cooperation, to speak about the reconciliation, not hate speech, not Azerbaijanophobia that we are hearing from Armenian delegation. Again, frankly speaking, I was so disappointed by the speeches of Armenians, and frankly, if those people still have this mind, the revanchist thinking will not help at all. And of course, those people who still believe in those non-existent entities must purchase one-way ticket to the Disneyland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tural Ganyaliev. Next speaker is Vice President Asay Guliev from Azerbaijan. He will be followed by Ms. Maria Karapetyan from Armenia, and after her is the speakers list closed. Vice President Asay Guliev, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear President, dear colleagues. First of all, I'd like to thank to all my colleagues who really shared their concerns over the issues concerning the security matters in Afghanistan. Of course, Afghanistan is an important area for us, but I am really, it is really regretful that Armenian colleagues abuse this opportunity and try to misuse this session to attack on Azerbaijan and try to make a propaganda against Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, it is, again shows that Armenian delegation neither ready for any constructive dialogue or is ready to prepare their society for the peace and the reconciliation with its neighbors. To be honest, I yesterday responded to the groundless accusations made by Armenian delegation. I don't want to repeat it because it is really hilarious. This is just a slanderous speeches. There is nothing to do with the reality. All the speeches based on the political agenda of Armenian delegation in order to blackmail my country. It is really unacceptable that the Armenian delegation is unable to accept and use the idea of it is military and the moral loss to Azerbaijan. But the conflict is over, and there is no Nagorno-Karabakh entity, as I already mentioned it. There is no even such a unit. Azerbaijan, as a sovereign country, made its decision to change, to make the appropriate changes in its administrative structures and create the Karabakh and the East Zangezur regions. it doesn't matter Armenia likes or dislikes these changes. It is a reality, and we will continue our political agenda, and we will pursue our national interests. Whatever has been done by Azerbaijan, it is in line with international legal norms and practice. But whatever is being said by Armenia, it is unfortunately counterproductive and doesn't help peace and the reconciliation of the region. I am asking the Armenian delegation, what are you looking for? Are you looking for the peace? Are you looking for the dialogue? Are you looking for, let's say, reconciliation? Or you are looking for confrontation? You just made you just answered to that question. But whatever we have been following, or we have been, let's say, witnessing, you don't draw any lessons from the last 40 or 44 days of military operations, or you don't want to have a peace. You want to continue this conflict for another 30 years. This is why, Madam President, it is really very, very unacceptable that our platform, our assembly is being abused by Armenian delegation for their propaganda. I do recommend my Armenian colleague to stop this type of behavior, to stop this type of propaganda, because it is not helpful neither to the region nor to their country in general. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Vice President Asay-Guliev. And now I will give the floor to the last speaker, Ms. Maria Karapetyan from Armenia. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President, dear colleagues, I think what has raised this unacceptable language and anger from the MPs from Azerbaijan is the fact that what I presented is actually not groundless accusations. It is the truth. There are footages of terrorists that Azerbaijan has transported to Nagorno-Karabakh with the help of Turkey from Syria and elsewhere last fall to fight a war together with the Azerbaijani army against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. And I want to draw your attention to what we just heard. The MP from Azerbaijan used the words pathetic, Disneyland, and schoolboy to refer to the speeches that we made. And this shouldn't go without proper condemnation from this parliamentary assembly. Mr. Azay-Guliev yesterday was talking about the breach of a code of ethics. It is exactly what his colleague did. I propose he gives these lectures to his colleague, Mr. Ganjaliev, not to use this sort of language to any member of parliament in this parliamentary assembly. It is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Moreover, they told us to open our eyes wide. What is this? A threat of a new war? Should we continue talking about the Nagorno-Karabakh and the right of its people to self-determination? It is exactly that. That's how I perceive it. When they say Nagorno-Karabakh is a non-existent entity, what are they referring to? That they will wipe out the rest of the Armenians, similar to the way they have done to the Armenians in the territories that have come under their control during this aggressive war that they have launched? This will not be tolerated. Nagorno-Karabakh exists. Its people have a right to self-determination. They have a right to security and a dignified life. And this is not something that I say or Armenia says. This is something that the international community says. The OSCE Minsk group, a group that has been given the mandate by this exact organization, of the Parliamentary Assembly of which we are all members of, reiterated time and again, following the aggressive war that Azerbaijan launched, that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is still awaiting its peaceful resolution. So we should all continue using the words Nagorno-Karabakh and resist this policy of elimination on the level of language regarding a people that has a right to self-determination. Thank you so much.
This was the last speech for today's discussion at the autumn meeting 2021. The theme for today, it has been the current security challenge focus on Afghanistan. And I would like to thank you all, dear colleagues, for your contribution to this important debate. It's a debate about the situation that's going on today and how we act as parliamentarians have huge impact. We are elected by the people. We are the ones who are in contact with our constituency. We have the possibility to talk with our governments, to push on them, to take steps forward, to build and act for a secure Afghanistan, and by this, a secure OSCE region and a secure world. And I really hope you will use this, what we have listened to today, what we have learned, the efforts we have taken as a possibility to act in your daily political life, because that's what we have to do as parliamentarians. And I would like to thank you all for your contribution. It has been very interesting to sit here and share on the meeting and listen to you. And also the focus, it has been on the three different dimensions that we have in the Helsinki agenda. So thank you. Once again, in my introduction, I noted how important it is that we share the message we have heard today with our governments. Let me use this opportunity to reiterate my sincere regret that the OSCE Human Dimension implementation meeting could not be held this year. In the coming days, I will share a letter with you to suggest that we ask our governments in a coordinated fashion what steps can be taken to protect the OSCE human dimension. After today's debate, I can just say the debate shows how important the human dimension is, and we have to act to protect it. And I hope you will use the letter that will be sent to you. And I thank you, and I look forward to your support on this initiative. I would also like to thank you very much for participating in our autumn meeting. And I would like to thank the International Secretariat and our interpreters for their work in organizing this event. And I wish you all success in your work and look forward to see you soon in person and hopefully in Vienna in February 2022. Thank you, dear colleagues. Have a nice day and good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.